Chapter 404. I'm a wood-powered paranormal. I have a plant that looks like a jellyfish. When it's released, it wraps me in the middle and isolates me from all the poisonous gas. Xiaoqing spouted nonsense with a straight face. I want to try and see if I can isolate this kind of fog as well. Be careful. Gu Pan, who knew Xiaoqing well, said seriously. Xiaoqing deliberately stretched out her hand in front of everyone. She put her hand into the fog. After a long time, nothing happened. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief, looking at Xiaoqing's gaze as if they were looking at their savior. Xiaoqing continued to talk nonsense seriously. With my current strength, I can only protect one person like me from this kind of fog. So, except for me and Air Dai, you all go out. Judging by the speed of the fog, the whole yard will be covered soon. You all wait for us outside. They looked at each other, nodded, and went out. Xiaoqing, who had fooled everyone, went into the fog with Air Dai. When she went in, she told Air Dai to see if he could absorb the fog to strengthen himself. Then, the two of them went in happily. The girl didn't expect that Xiaoqing could come in. She was planning to eat that person first. Xiaoqing and Air Dai came in. The girl let out a shrill roar, and the babies were the first to pounce on her. Actually, they were all innocent. Before they were born, their chance to live had been taken away by someone else, and they had been transformed into such monsters. But Xiaoqing had no choice but to kill them, because if she didn't kill them, more people would die in their hands in the future. Don't forget, these baby-like zombies can't control their desires, they can eat people. So, Xiaoqing and Air Dai didn't show any mercy when they attacked. These baby zombies were not weak. The weakest one was at the peak of level 3, and the strongest one was at level 4. However, they were useless in front of Xiaoqing. Soon, Xiaoqing and Air Dai killed more than half of them. The little girl zombie saw that the situation was not good, so she rushed over immediately. She was probably a paranormal when she was alive, and her power was strange. She could mist her body quickly. When she turned into a cloud of mist, her speed would become very fast. Then, she would condense into a solid body and appear in front of Xiaoqing. When she was fatally injured, she would turn into a cloud of mist again. In this way, Xiaoqing couldn't hurt her at all. Xiaoqing and the little girl zombie fought for a long time. When all the baby zombies were killed, they still couldn't defeat the little girl zombie. She wasn't as strong as Xiaoqing, but her power was too strange. Zombies had a strong recovery ability, so Xiaoqing couldn't do anything to her in a short time. Seeing that the fog had already spread out, Xiaoqing was a little anxious. She suddenly attacked, temporarily freezing the space around the little girl, and then attacked the little girl. She almost destroyed half of the little girl's body. The little girl became crazy. She suddenly turned into a cloud of red mist and rushed to Xiaoqing. The whole cloud of red mist had a sense of madness. Air Dai seemed to have found something. She quickly threw herself at Xiaoqing. Then, with a loud sound, the cloud of red mist exploded when it touched Air Dai. The power of the explosion was very strong. The little girl, who only had a small half of her body left, took the opportunity to run away. When the power of the explosion calmed down a little, Xiaoqing immediately stood up and held Air Dai in her arms. She eagerly checked Air Dai's body. Air Dai's back had no flesh at the moment. She could even see his spine and the internal organs inside. What was more terrible was that Air Dai didn't recover. If it was in the past, his wounds would definitely heal slowly. But this time, Xiaoqing checked for a long time, but the wounds didn't heal by themselves. Xiaoqing was so distressed. She didn't have time to absorb the mist. She found a piece of clothing from the space and wrapped it around Air Dai. Then, she ran out with Air Dai in her arms. She was so fast that the people waiting outside only felt a gust of wind in front of their eyes. Then, she disappeared. Xiao Qing only left a sentence, one escaped. In fact, it was killed. Everyone was speechless. Chapter 405. Xiao Qing didn't have time to say more. She hugged the air dye and ran back to her house. There was an indescribable fear in her heart. In the past, even if she or the air dye were injured, Xiao Qing didn't have this kind of feeling. Because they were zombies, unless it was a fatal injury like cutting off their heads, normal injuries would heal very quickly. But this time, the air dye didn't show any signs of healing. Xiao Qing was very scared. She was so scared that her heart was flustered. She was so scared that her legs went soft. She was so scared that her heart was in a mess. When she rushed home, Fu Jingma was watering the flowers. When he saw Xiao Qing rushing in with the air dye, he was shocked. "Sister Qing, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Watch the door." Xiao Qing hugged the air dye and rushed upstairs expressionlessly. Probably because he was more relaxed after entering his own house, Fu Jingma accidentally saw the air dye's back that wasn't covered by clothes. It was a shocking sight. Fu Jingma was stunned. He stood there in a daze for a long time before he chuckled. There was an indescribable madness in his eyes. He was wondering how Fu Jingshan could be safe and sound and had only lost his memory. It turned out that Fu Jingshan was no longer human. He held the kettle in his hand. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable jealousy. Fu Jingshan, oh Fu Jingshan. When he was alive, he took everything from him. Now that he was dead, he still wanted to fight with him. He couldn't accept it. Why did all the good things belong to Fu Jingshan? Why did everyone like Fu Jingshan? Why did Fu Jingshan not have to do anything to get the things that he couldn't get no matter how much effort he put in? Why? He and Fu Jingshan had the same face, but Xiao Qing would rather like a zombie than look at him. Fu Jingma's eyes gradually turned from crazy jealousy to cold and bloodthirsty. A zombie. He wasn't even a human. What did he have to fight with him? Fu Jingshan, you should have died long ago. So this time, you should die quietly. Whatever you have, I will take over for you. Xiao Qing carried air dye to the second floor and carefully put him on the bed. She removed his coat, but the shocking wound still showed no signs of recovery. Xiao Qing observed carefully and discovered that his wounds were actually recovering. However, there was a special power that was destroying his wounds at the same time as they were recovering. Every time the wound healed a little, it would immediately be destroyed, so it looked like it hadn't healed at all. She was extremely anxious. When she turned around, she realized that Yan Qiue and the others were not back yet. She rushed out like a gust of wind and carried Yan Qiue back. "Quick, take a look. What's wrong with him?" Yan Qiue was carried so hard that he couldn't breathe. He wanted to joke with Xiao Qing with a bitter smile, but he saw the huge wound on air dye's back. He didn't like air dye very much. He was jealous that air dye had Xiao Qing's heart. Sometimes, he would secretly complain about him. However, he never thought of letting air dye die because Xiao Qing would be sad. Moreover, air dye loved Xiao Qing very much. He was willing to protect Xiao Qing with his life. Yan Qiue could see that. Therefore, even if he was crazy with jealousy, Yan Qiue didn't do anything to air dye. On the contrary, when he saw air dye's serious injury, his first reaction was to think about how to help air dye. After Xiao Qing told Yan Qiue about her discovery, Yan Qiue gritted his teeth and said, "I need some time to do research because I'm not sure what the power in his wounds is." Xiao Qing nodded and said, "Just do your research. Air dye should be able to hold on for a while." Chapter 406. Yan Qiue nodded and began to move her tools. Xiao Qing was very anxious. She suddenly felt like smoking, so she walked out of the door and lit a cigarette. It was as if this could ease her anxiety. Yan Hanqing and the others came back one after another. Seeing Xiaoqing like this, they knew that something must have happened. Gu Panpan was the representative and asked Xiaoqing, "How is it?" "The injury is very serious, and there is no way to recover. Qiue is thinking of a way." Xiaoqing took a puff and put out the cigarette. She asked in a low voice, "How is the fog?" "It is still spreading. Old Master Qin has already sent people to evacuate the residents in the city. Currently, everyone is moving out of the city. The Prime Minister sent researchers to take some of the fog back for research. We don't know the results yet." Yan Hanqing said in a low voice. "Let's go back and rest first. The fog won't spread for a while." Xiaoqing forced a smile and said, "Hanqing, wait for a while." The others looked at each other and left. Only Yan Hanqing was left. Xiaoqing put out the cigarette, but the remaining half was still between her fingers. She twirled the cigarette and said, "I have a bad feeling. Hanqing, if something happens in the future and I am not by your side, go directly to Jiang City. I believe that there are more zombies. Although they are no longer human, they are more trustworthy than humans, it won't happen." Yan Hanqing grabbed Xiaoqing's hand. After holding it, he felt that he was too impulsive. However, he couldn't bear to let go of that warm and soft hand. "Listen to me. I'm not saying that something bad will definitely happen in the future, but it's better to be safe than sorry. After all, this is a very good escape route. Yin Yi is a good person." She said in a low voice, "People should always think more." Yan Hanqing silently agreed. Xiaoqing continued, "In this post-apocalyptic world, no one can say for sure how long they can live. I'm always worried that if one day something really happens, my son will be entrusted to you." Yan Hanqing suppressed the bitterness in his heart and whispered, "Nothing will happen." In order to reassure Xiaoqing, he added, "I will protect the baby. Then I'm relieved." "You should also go and rest," Xiaoqing said. Yan Hanqing reluctantly let go of his hand and slowly left. After he left, Xiaoqing leaned against the windowsill and closed her eyes. She was exhausted. From the apocalypse until now, she had to shoulder the safety of everyone around her. Sometimes, she was so tired that she wanted to cry, but when she saw the gentle and happy eyes of the people around her, she would have the strength to grit her teeth and continue to bear it. Since a long time ago, her instructor had said that she was a person who liked to carry everything on her own. Living like this would be very difficult and tiring. If possible, Xiaoqing also hoped that there would be someone who could share the burden with her. However, most of the time, she would not think too much. She would only grit her teeth and walk forward, opening a path for Air Dai and the others. At this time, she understood Yan Qiue's masochistic tendencies. When she was very tired and bitter, her temper would become very bad. However, she would not vent her anger on the people around her. If she held it in for too long, she would become a pervert. No wonder Yan Qiue always said that the two of them were a match made in heaven. Thinking about it this way, it was indeed true. Xiaoqing thought about a lot of things. In the end, she decided to go out for a walk. She went to the place where the fog was spreading and tried to absorb the fog. This kind of fog could indeed be absorbed and was very beneficial to her. However, her absorption speed was not as fast as the speed of the fog spreading. Secondly, she could not expose this fact. After absorbing for a while, Xiaoqing had a flash of inspiration and summoned out her family's Meng's little vine. Just as she expected, once the vine plunged into the fog, it began to absorb the fog. Several vines were like several transportation pipes, unceasingly transporting the fog into her body, and the speed was indeed much faster. Chapter 407. After absorbing for a while, she stopped. She couldn't absorb it secretly like this. She had to find an opportunity to let everyone know that she had a way to deal with the fog. Then, she would deal with it openly. Otherwise, it would be very disadvantageous for her if she was discovered. After looking at the fog, Xiao Qin went out of the city again. Along the way, she saw many people moving out. They were moving all their valuables and belongings out. Many tents had been set up in the open space outside the capital. Those people were temporarily living in these tents. If the fog could be dealt with before it spread out of the city, they could move back directly. If the fog couldn't be dealt with before it spread out of the city, they would have to move further away. Everyone looked worried. After all, they had settled down and no one wanted to be homeless again. Moreover, according to the researchers, if there was no way to suppress the fog, it could even spread to the whole world. As long as there was enough time, this possibility was very high. The first to be completely submerged would definitely be China. This was because the fog contained a kind of devouring virus. It could assimilate the air and then spread out continuously. Father Qin was leading people to settle down the ordinary people who had just left the city. Qin Zishi was also leading a small team of guards to patrol around. Then, Xiao Qin met the number 1 chief for the first time. The chief looked to be in his 40s. His eyebrows were very gentle and had a scholarly air. However, Xiao Qin knew that no one who could sit in this position was simple. Especially after Doomsday, they could still hold their position. He seemed to want to get to know Xiao Qin. Xiao Qin was worried about Air Dai, so she went back after chatting for a while. The next day, Old Master Qin sent a message. The group of old fellows in the research institute had studied it all night. The final conclusion was that it couldn't be suppressed. This was because they couldn't find anything that could restrain the fog. No wonder Wu Buping said before he died that he wanted the whole world to be buried with him. Presumably, there was no antidote for this virus since it was developed. That was why Wu Buping didn't dare to use it until he was about to die. Yan Qiue hadn't come out yet. He only had a bowl of porridge halfway through. When he came out, his eyes were dark. As he ate the porridge, he was calculating something. After finishing the porridge at the door, he plunged into the room again. Xiao Qin couldn't help at all. She felt more and more annoyed. At this time, she realized that her relationship with Air Dai was not as simple as family. She liked Air Dai and Yan Qiue. Once she admitted it, Xiao Qin felt inexplicably relieved. In fact, she had always known it, but she just didn't dare to admit it. Xiao Qin really wanted to laugh at herself for being so timid. Then she felt at a loss. What about the future? She knew Yan Qiue's character. As long as she wanted him to do something, even if she wanted him to die immediately, he would do it immediately. If she said that she was willing to accept Yan Qiue, even if it was just bringing an Air Dai with her, Yan Qiue would go crazy with joy. She always knew this. But what about Air Dai? He had no memory and didn't know anything. He just loved her instinctively. What would happen after he regained his memory? Xiao Qin thought about it for a long time and decided to put this matter aside for the time being. When Air Dai regained his memory, she would ask Air Dai if he was willing to live with her and Yan Qiue. If Air Dai wasn't willing, she would let go even if she couldn't bear to. If Air Dai was willing, then he shouldn't blame her for being selfish for keeping both men. Chapter 408. As for what the world would think of her, was that important? She was living for herself and for the people she cared about. After thinking through this, Xiao Qin felt much more relaxed. She had taken her revenge. All that was left was Fu Jinling, who didn't know what was good for her. If she met her in the future, she could just kill her. Everyone in her family had the ability to protect themselves. Even if something happened to her one day, they would still be able to live well. She didn't need to worry about this anymore. She also thought through the matter between Air Dai and Yan Qiue. She felt that her life was almost complete. After dragging it on for another day, Xiao Qin felt that she couldn't drag it on any longer. Then, she went to look for the bureau chief and went straight to the point. I have a way to suppress the fog. As for whether I can get rid of the fog, I'm not sure. The bureau chief asked very seriously, will it harm you? Xiao Qing shook her head and continued to make up nonsense. I'm not sure either. But I have a kind of ability that was given to me by my plants. That is purification. I can absorb the fog into my plants and then slowly purify it. Although the speed is a little slow, it's still faster than the speed at which the fog spreads. The bureau chief grabbed Xiao Qing's hand and said, I thank you on behalf of the entire country. If you find that it's harmful to your body, please stop. We will think of another way. Xiao Qing nodded and brought her small vines to absorb the fog. At the start, the bureau chief, Old Master Qing, and the rest were looking at her worriedly from not far away. Xiao Qing had to appear to be strenuous, serious, and cautious. She had to absorb the fog slowly and maintain a speed that was slightly faster than the speed at which the fog spread. When the fog had spread a little more, the bureau chief and the rest had all retreated. Only then did Xiao Qing speed up. Dozens of vines flew out and absorbed a pile of fog into her body in a matter of minutes, then converted it into her energy. Middle stage 5th level, late stage 5th level, peak stage 5th level. Very quickly, Xiao Qing felt that she was only one step away from 6th level. Before she broke through, absorbing the mist would be useless. Xiao Qing stored all the mist in her vines and body, waiting to absorb it after she broke through. After the mist accumulated, it formed small green beads that existed in the vines and her body. Xiao Qing worked day and night, and Yan Qiue also researched day and night. In the end, they came to a conclusion that the reason why Dai couldn't recover was that there was a special kind of energy in his wound. This kind of energy was very destructive, and it kept destroying the newly healed wound. There were two ways to restore the Dai. The first was to find something that could restrain this energy and remove it. The second was to let the Dai break through. If Dai could break through to level 5, then his body would undergo a rebirth. When his recovery ability greatly exceeded the destructive power of this energy, as long as Xiao Qing suppressed this energy, Dai would be able to recover. As for the thing that could restrain this energy, Yan Qiue hadn't found it yet. However, Yan Qiue temporarily maintained Dai's current condition so that his wound wouldn't worsen. This allowed Xiao Qing to be at ease and continue absorbing the mist. The mist became less and less, and everyone was cheering. They looked at Xiao Qing as if they were looking at a hero. Xiao Qing didn't care about this. She didn't need to be everyone's hero. She just wanted to be Dai and the rest's protective umbrella. That was enough. After the last piece of mist was gradually absorbed by her, Xiao Qing burped in satisfaction. She felt that her body and mind were full. She moved her body, and her eyebrows relaxed. As long as she was given an opportunity, she could immediately break through to level 5. The bureau chief walked over with his men, and his eyebrows were filled with joy. Captain Xiao, you've done a great job this time. You've saved the entire capital city. Xiao Qing waved her hand. It's just a small matter. If you keep saying this, I really can't take it anymore. No matter what, your contribution this time can't be denied. I have to thank you on behalf of everyone. The bureau chief thanked her while thinking about what reward to give Xiao Qing. At this moment, Gu Panpan ran over with Yan Qiue on her back. Sister Qing, Dai is missing. Yan Qiue, who was on her back, was also injured. Her face was pale as she curled up on Gu Panpan's back. When Xiao Qing heard Gu Panpan's words, her head buzzed. Chapter 409. First is my daughter's novel. She has millions of credits and is guaranteed to be a scammer. The national supporting female ghost catcher, leisurely summary, she is an unknown extra in the entertainment industry. She goes to the set every day just to get food. She is the last heir of the Yin-Yang family. She failed to guide the soul and died. After her rebirth, she became the daughter of the Jiang group. She has a father who is obsessed with his daughter and 3 brothers who are obsessed with her sister. During the day, she would still be an extra in the set. At night, she would have sex with a ghost. Oh no, she would lead the ghost to the right path. She accidentally became famous as the evil female supporting lead. Advertisements and scripts came one after another. She accidentally formed fan clubs all over the country. People all over the country followed her. She was known as the national supporting female and received so many awards. She accidentally caused the film emperors and actresses to quarrel because of her. The film emperors and actresses were willing to play supporting roles for her. The directors fought to tailor a script for her. Her path to stardom was bright, but she still did not film at night. She only took on supporting roles. Her opponents slandered her and said she was acting like a big shot. Her fans collectively asked her to be the lead. The paparazzi chased her all over the city just for an answer. She just smiled. But, looking at the king of hell behind her, who was supposed to be cold and abstinent, she was confused. She just came out at night to catch a ghost. Why did he have an angry expression on his face that said, "How dare you cheat on me?" Then there is my heir Tun. She just finished a long novel. Needless to say, she is also very cute and easy to tease. The transmigration country queen Shang, refreshing heir Tun summary. Unfortunately, she just took a nap on the plane. When she opened her eyes again, she returned to the time before liberation. She went from being the female CEO of a multinational corporation with a net worth of billions to a down-and-out farmer's girl with old and young children. God, this joke is too big. Even if you want to lower your status, you can't lower it like this. Damn, was it easy for her to be a female CEO? Mu Jinsi, who was used to countless storms, expressed that she could not accept such a huge change. Even if she was down and out like an ancient farmer's girl, she had to be the master and create a new kingdom of her own. First of all, she brainwashed her honest parents who were often bullied. She made them understand the truth of kind people being bullied and kind horses being ridden. Next was to teach the pedantic big brother bookworm so that he would never return on the path of being a black-bellied person. Next was, did she really give birth to this little bun? Looking at the skinny and tanned bun hugging her thigh tightly, Mu Jinsi was momentarily confused. Forget it, it's just raising a bun. I guarantee that he'll be fat and white. Mu Jinsi went all out to accumulate wealth. She quickly became the richest person in the village, the richest person in the town, the richest person in the city, and the richest person in the country. Just when she felt that she had achieved her goal, wave after wave of relatives suddenly appeared. Even Steamed Bun's father appeared. Mini theater, Mu Jinsi, just because you say it's yours, it's yours. Do you have any proof? If you're so capable, do a paternity test. Steamed Bun's father, it looks so much like me. If it's not mine, whose is it? Mu Jinsi replied, the world is full of wonders. It's not strange for people to look alike. Steamed Bun's father, in that case, I have a better way to prove it. What? He sounded suspicious. Let's have another one and compare them, then we'll know. Fuck off. Finally, it was Meng Meng Qing Qing, Huang Rua Meng, when Yun Yun Yun, you can tease her as you wish, the seductive wife of marriage, stop fooling around, by Wen Yun Shui Qing introduction, beautiful, sexy, and seductive. She is a third-rate supporting actress in front of the big screen. In the TV series, she is known as the mistress, lover, and bad woman. She is a vixen in the eyes of the audience. He is the CEO of the Imperial Entertainment Group, the youngest billionaire on the Forbes list. He is cold, noble, and powerful. He controls the economic lifeline of the city of Brisk. He is cold and emotionless, but he loves her to the bone. One day, bodyguard, sir, the young madam said, said that you are old meat and she likes fresh meat. She wants to divorce you. Man, she dares. That night, I heard that you want to divorce me. Yes. You really want to divorce me? Yes. He walked forward slowly, and his gaze swept past the magazine on the side. His devilishly charming face was filled with suppressed anger, and his cold fingers gently pinched her chin. Because of this man? Yes. Woman, are you challenging my bottom line? She raised her eyes and was fearless. Yes. Veins popped out of his skin. His thin lips curled up and he tore off her dress. I will make you make sounds other than yes. Purple marks appeared all over her body. She was taken aback. The divorce was unsuccessful. She ran away from home. Bodyguard, sir, something bad has happened. The young madam is missing. Man, how dare she? Many years later, she returned as the Queen of Movies. As soon as she got off the plane, she was forced into a corner. Where do you think you're going with my seed? To get married? Can't I? Woman, don't forget. You are my wife. Unless you want to, commit bigamy. The man leaned against the wall with one hand and squinted his dark eyes dangerously. Within a few days, a marriage advertisement had spread to every corner of the city of Brisk. Mother of Stars, the Yu family, was looking for a husband for all the single men in the city with a dowry of 100 million. The man stood up abruptly and his face turned green. Shen Wanhuan, how dare you? He wanted to see who dared to marry his woman. Cohabitation, hey, are you asleep? The woman patted his shoulder. The man looked up but didn't make a sound. Are you really asleep? The woman didn't give up and continued to harass him. There was still no response. The woman poked him again. The man finally lost control and pressed the woman under him. If you're not sleepy, then don't sleep. Ugh. Her words of resistance turned into soft moans. Oh. That's not it. She just wanted him to go over the script with her. Cutie bow. At the dinner table, a certain baby pouted and complained, Mom's cooking sucks. That's true. Little Flying Sky doesn't even eat your mom's cooking. A certain dad couldn't help but complain. Little Flying Sky was their family dog. Sucks. Then why did you finish it all? A certain mom was angry. Dad's cooking is worse than a dog's, a certain baby said. Finally, she brought up a new story for the baby. Rumored best actor spoils his husband to the bone. Chapter 410. Dai was still taking care of her wound. Why did she suddenly disappear? Xiao Qing's face was as pale as a ghost. She grabbed Gu Panpan and asked anxiously, what happened? Yan Qiue tried to hold on and said, I was in my room, researching the antidote. Suddenly, a group of people barged in and snatched Dai away. Xiao Qing closed her eyes and forced herself to calm down. After a while, she said, Pan Pan, bring Qiue and my son. Don't bother about Fu Jingmo. Leave capital city first. Gu Panpan was about to speak when she saw Xiao Qing suddenly open her eyes. Her eyes were cold. You will only be a burden if you stay. Bring Qiue and the baby away. That will be the greatest help to me. Yan Hanqing stepped forward and said, Pan Pan, bring them away. I will stay. Enough. You leave too. Xiao Qing said indifferently, don't forget what you promised me. Yan Hanqing's face was very ugly. He clenched his fists tightly and said after a while, I know. Xiao Qing watched them leave. When she turned back to look at those people in capital city, there was only killing intent in her eyes. She and Dai had put in so much effort to save capital city. In the end, Dai was injured and was snatched away by someone. If anything happened to Dai, she would destroy the entire capital city. So what if she killed everyone? At most, they would be buried with air dye. Guessing that Gu Panpan and the rest had already left the city, Shao Qing said indifferently, "Who took my lover away? Hand him over." The bureau chief was stunned and said, "What happened?" At this moment, the Li family members who were standing at the side stood out. "What happened? Let me say it. The woman standing in front of you is not a hero at all. The man beside her is a zombie. I'm afraid this incident was caused by her." No matter how shocked everyone was, Shao Qing just stared at the man from the Li family. "Are you the one who kidnapped my lover? Hand him over." The bureau chief frowned and said to the man from the Li family, "If you took her away, then bring her back. This must be a misunderstanding." Old Master Qin also said coldly, "Li Yaowu, we all know who's behind this. Don't throw dirty water on Shao Qing. Hand him over first." The man from the Li family said, "Qin, you're with her, aren't you? Otherwise, why would he protect her like this?" He took a step forward, then turned around and said to everyone, "Who doesn't have a family member who was eaten by zombies? Who didn't have friends?" That was what zombies said. This woman, she harbored evil intentions. She actually raised a zombie. Maybe she killed a lot of people in secret to feed this zombie. Don't talk nonsense if you don't have evidence. Qin Zishi frowned and said coldly. "Evidence?" Li Yaowu sneered and said, "Then I'll show you the evidence, Director Chen." The director of the research institute stood out and said, "Mr. Li did send a zombie to our institute today. It was at level 4 and looked like an ordinary human. Only after it was injured could we find that its skin had rotted. Air dye was in the research institute." Shao Qing, who came to this conclusion, calmed down a lot. However, she was more and more worried about whether air dye would be hurt. She looked at the people with superpowers and ordinary people. They were also saved by air dye and were one of the reasons why air dye was injured. However, these people all looked at Shao Qing suspiciously and whispered in private. Gradually, voices began to come from the crowd. Chapter 411. Saving people. I don't think she has any good intentions. Maybe she was the one who created the green fog. Otherwise, why can't others cure it, but she can? Which good person would raise a zombie? I think there must be something wrong with her. Do you think she will really catch people alive and feed them to zombies? Shao Qing was a little disappointed, but only a little. She didn't have any hope for the so-called human nature. Even if she absorbed the fog with the intention of strengthening herself, she still saved everyone. But the kindness of saving lives couldn't be compared to a few words of sowing discord. Shao Qing was very calm. "Are you done? Give me the person." "Shao Qing, why are you so arrogant? Do you think you are already invincible?" Li Yaowu said coldly, "Let me tell you, if you can step out of the capital today, my name will be written upside down. If you dare to touch Shao Qing today, my name will be written upside down." Old Master Qin also stepped forward and said expressionlessly. He believed that Shao Qing was definitely not a bad person. No matter whether air dye was a zombie or not, at least one thing was certain, and that was that air dye and Shao Qing were the saviors of the entire capital. No matter what, people couldn't forget their roots and couldn't be ungrateful. Even if he didn't know Shao Qing before, he couldn't do something like turning around and attacking his benefactor. Moreover, he and Shao Qing were friends despite the difference in age. Li Yaowu straightened his back in front of Old Master Qin for the first time. He raised his head and said, "Old Master Qin, at this point, you still want to protect her?" The bureau chief was the most embarrassed between the two. On one hand, he had a good impression of Shao Qing. On the other hand, he couldn't allow zombies to appear in the capital. The bureau chief said with a headache, "How about this, Miss Shao, you go back with us first. We will talk about it after we investigate this matter clearly." Shao Qing just looked at Li Yaowu indifferently. I'll say it one last time. Hand over the heir die or die. In this big capital, no one can stop me from killing you. As long as you say no, I will let your blood splatter in 5 steps. Do you believe me? Xiao Qing tilted her head slightly, a cold smile on her lips. Seeing this, Li Yaowu suddenly felt somewhat flustered. For some reason, he did not dare to say those words of rejection, those tough words. She glanced at everyone and said, I never thought that I saved anyone. I just wanted to do it, so I did it. So from the beginning, I never thought of asking for anything in return. Even now, I'm still saying the same thing. Hand over my lover and I'll take him away. If you don't hand him over, it doesn't matter. At most, I'll turn the world upside down. Apart from the people she cared about, the life and death of everyone else always depended on her mood. Now, these people wanted to hurt her heir die. Then, they could not blame her for being ruthless. Li Yaowu was very flustered at first, but when he saw that the people around him were all high-level paranormals, he felt that he was too cowardly. So, he braced himself and said, maybe you have some conspiracy. You want to leave just because you want to. What kind of place do you think Jingdu is? Xiao Qing tore the space apart easily, then appeared in front of him and grabbed his neck. Suddenly, she stretched out her fingernails and inserted them into his flesh. As long as she used a little force, she could break Li Yaowu's neck bone. No one had expected Xiao Qing to suddenly make a move. They had thought that Xiao Qing was just joking. Even a level 5 paranormal couldn't kill Li Yaowu while he was under heavy protection, right? Then, Xiao Qing easily grabbed Li Yaowu in her hand. She lifted Li Yaowu like a dead dog and said, take me to the heir die. Chapter 412. Li Yaowu's eyes rolled back. Seeing that he was about to die, Xiao Qing loosened her grip slightly. Don't make me repeat myself. The bureau chief didn't want to go against Xiao Qing, so he waved his hand. Take her there. President Chen widened his eyes and said, no. This is the first time I've seen a zombie with such clear consciousness. If we can dissect him and figure out why he can retain his consciousness, we might be able to develop a drug to resist the zombie poison. He's willing to save the capital, so he must be willing to sacrifice himself for the people of the country. Sacrifice my ass. Xiao Qing waved her hand and vines drilled out of the ground, surrounding President Chen in the middle. She said with a cold gaze, since you're so righteous and willing to sacrifice yourself for the country and the people, then sacrifice yourself for me first. With that, she controlled the vines to pierce President Chen's body and injected a little bit of fog into his body. The fog spread quickly in the human body and soon reflected on the surface of his body. The specific reaction was that President Chen started to feel a little itchy on his neck. When he reached out to scratch it, rotten flesh fell off. He didn't know whether he was panicking or in despair. He desperately covered his neck and screamed, no. 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 Xiao Qing said coldly, don't you need a zombie with consciousness? You're one now. Thank you for sacrificing yourself for the country and the people. I think that a patriotic person like you must be very willing to lie on the operating table in the laboratory. At this moment, those people looked at Xiao Qing as if they were looking at a demon. They couldn't help but retreat, afraid that they would become like President Chen. President Chen turned around in horror to pull them. Save me. Save me. However, no one dared to approach him. One retreated faster than the other. He was completely desperate and pounced on Xiao Qing with a roar. You demon, I'm going to fight it out with you. Xiao Qing waved her hand gently and the man-eating flower drilled out. It opened its petals wide and waited for President Chen to pounce on it. It swallowed President Chen who was pouncing over. After swallowing it, it closed its petals and prepared to digest the delicacy. When it was halfway digested, it opened its petals and, like a human vomiting, spat out the half-melted President Chen. After vomiting, she would cover her head with a leaf. Sob, 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 it was so difficult. Some people in the crowd couldn't help but want to vomit. Vomiting was contagious. If one person vomited, others would vomit as well. Xiao Qing didn't care about their reactions. She just frowned and said, "Take me to see my lover." How many times do I need to say it? I don't mind killing 2 more people. Only then did one of the researchers lead Xiao Qing to the research institute. Xiao Qing carried Li Yaowu and followed behind. When she passed by Old Master Qin, she said indifferently, "Old Master Qin, no matter what happens later, please don't interfere. Even if I die, it's fine, okay?" Old Master Qin understood what Xiao Qing meant. She didn't want to implicate the Qin family. Today, there would definitely be a bloody battle between her and the Li family. If the Qin family interfered, it was very likely that the Qin family would become the target of public criticism. Of course, there was one thing that Old Master Qin didn't know. Xiao Qing was already prepared to go all out. Today, she, the Li family, and those who dared to stop her would fight to the death. If the members of the Qin family were present, she would have to worry about accidentally injuring them, which would distract her. As long as the members of the Qin family weren't present, anyone who tried to stop her was her enemy. So what if she killed them all? Chapter 413. The Research Institute was built in the middle of the capital. Due to its importance, the security was very tight. However, due to the fog a few days ago, many people had left, so the security here seemed to be much more lax. Xiao Qing followed behind the researcher and walked all the way to a laboratory. Just as she reached the door, she saw Fu Jingma holding a knife and trying to stab Air Dai on the operating table. Xiao Qing couldn't care less about Li Yaowu in her hands. She casually broke his neck and threw Li Yaowu away. Then, she quickly rushed forward and kicked Fu Jingma away. Air Dai's face was pale as he lay on the operating table. He still looked like he was on his last breath. Xiao Qing violently tore apart the things that bound Air Dai's hands and feet. She picked up Air Dai and touched Air Dai's face with heartache. An old man from the crowd rushed forward and hugged Li Yaowu's corpse. Son. He should be the head of the Li family from the previous generation. His status was similar to Old Master Qin's in the Qin family. Xiao Qing. The Li family and you are irreconcilable. Xiao Qing sneered and looked at him. Long ago, when you made a move on Air Dai, I was already irreconcilable with you. What's the point of saying such nonsense? As she walked past, she stepped on Fu Jingma's neck. Right now, she didn't care whether he was Air Dai's brother or not. She only knew that Fu Jingma wanted Air Dai to die. Then, let him die. Fu Jingma couldn't take it lying down. He actually wanted to ask, "Why won't you look at me? I clearly have the same appearance as him. I can be gentler and more docile than him. I love you more than him. Why won't you like me?" The moment his neck was broken, Fu Jingma was reminded of many years ago. He was standing downstairs and Fu Jingshan's Air Dai was standing on the second floor. He was high and mighty and his eyes were filled with disgust. At that moment, Fu Jingma had a dark thought. He wanted to take everything away from Fu Jingshan. They were both that man's children. Why was it that he could only be an illegitimate child, while Fu Jingshan could have everything? A year later, he pushed Fu Jingshan down from the third floor. Unfortunately, Fu Jingshan didn't die. His head was injured, and he couldn't remember who pushed him down. That was the first time Fu Jingma had thought of killing someone. He wanted to kill Fu Jingshan. From then on, Fu Jingma understood his own heart more and more, but from then on, he never had a good chance to make a move on Fu Jingma. When the apocalypse came, Fu Jingma pushed Fu Jingshan for the second time. This time, he pushed Fu Jingshan into a group of zombies. At that time, Fu Jingma felt that no matter how lucky Fu Jingshan was, he could only be eaten by the zombies. Unfortunately, Fu Jingshan didn't know how many good deeds he had done in his previous life to save his luck. He didn't die and only became a zombie. Fu Jingma felt that God was too unfair. He gave everything to Fu Jingshan, but he had nothing. Even if Fu Jingshan became a zombie in the end, he could still easily get Xiaoqing's love. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get what he wanted. This must be God playing a joke on him. After Xiaoqing casually killed Fu Jingma, she walked towards the group of people behind her. She walked out leisurely, not worried about being stopped at all. She wasn't afraid at all. She walked leisurely as if she was taking a stroll. Old Master Li had just sent off his son. This was the most painful moment. He hugged his dead son and said with a heart-wrenching voice, "Today, if you can take one step out of the capital, then there is only one possibility. The Li family is all dead." Chapter 4:14. Xiaoqing held Dai in her arms and felt much better. She looked at Master Li with a smile and said gently, "I'll satisfy your wish." She hadn't killed anyone for a long time. Today, the Qin family completely pissed her off and touched her bottom line. Xiaoqing even thought that she had gone crazy for a moment. If she hadn't found Dai, or something had happened to Dai, she would have killed everyone in the capital city. Luckily, Dai was fine, but she wasn't going to let the Li family go. Under Xiaoqing's repeated orders, the Qin family had already retreated. Even the leader's men were dragged away by Master Qin. Then, only those who wanted to go against her were left. All those who stood in her way were people who wanted to hurt her family's dummy. Then, they should all die. After the breakthrough, it was the first time that Xiaoqing used her full strength. She carried Dai on her back and tied Dai tightly to her body with vines to free her hands. Then, she walked towards the Li family and those who stood in her way. Actually, killing people wasn't pleasant at all. Xiaoqing thought so, and then vines stretched out everywhere. Anyone who wanted to get close to her and Dai would be crushed by the vines before they could get close. Xiaoqing didn't even need to move her hands. She only needed to use the vines. Xiaoqing walked all the way from the research institute to the outside. She couldn't remember how many people she had killed. She only remembered that she left a long bloody road wherever she walked. The ground under her feet was sticky. Even when she walked outside, she still left bloody footprints. There were still people who didn't fear death and rushed towards her. Xiaoqing took their lives without blinking. In the beginning, the Li family did it by themselves. Later, they began to incite others to do it. Xiaoqing didn't care if the person who attacked her was from the Li family or another family. Anyway, anyone who attacked her was an enemy. After she walked for a while, the Li family couldn't take the loss anymore. They had no choice but to use their trump card, a team of a few hundred superpowered people. In the team, none of the ability users were below level 3. This was the last trump card of the Li family. Even when they were fighting with the Qin family, even when they were being trampled under the feet of the Qin family, the Li family had never used this trump card. But now, old Master Li had gone crazy. He didn't know if it was because he had committed too many sins, but God couldn't see through it. Old Master Li had an affair with many women, but in the end, he only gave birth to Li Yaowu. Li Yaowu had countless wives and mistresses. He was almost 40 years old, but he still hadn't given birth to a son. In other words, Xiaoqing had cut off the roots of the Li family with a gentle pinch. The Li family would have no descendants from then on. Anyway, old Master Li was 70 years old. He probably couldn't make the iron tree bloom again. It was no wonder that old Master Li wanted to fight Xiaoqing to the death. But what was the use of risking his life? There was an answer. No matter how powerful Xiaoqing was, it couldn't change the fact that she was only one person. She could kill an old master with her fists. Ants could kill an elephant if there were many of them. Besides, Xiaoqing wasn't an elephant, and the group of people around her wasn't as simple as ants. The most important thing was that Xiaoqing had to protect Air Dai. When Air Dai was on her, she couldn't tear the space and leave directly. Otherwise, it was very likely that she would hurt Air Dai. Therefore, when Xiaoqing walked out step by step, the resistance she encountered was so great that even with her strength, she began to get hurt. As soon as Xiaoqing got hurt, someone began to exclaim, "She's not human either." Chapter 4:15. Without blood, once injured, they would recover quickly. This was the characteristic of zombies. At this moment, everyone looked at Xiaoqing in a different way. She was a powerful zombie who could talk and think. She looked like a human being. If she had bad intentions when she sneaked into the capital, she could have infected most of the people in the capital and turned them into zombies. It would have been easy for her to assassinate the leader. Xiaoqing didn't care about the injuries on her body. She commanded the vines to cooperate with the space cracks and kept reaping the lives of the people. Maybe there were innocent people who were controlled by the Li family. But so what? Xiaoqing didn't have time to distinguish who was good and who was bad. They could only say that they were unlucky to meet Xiaoqing. That was all. Mr. Li was so angry that he vomited blood. He watched Xiaoqing break through the encirclement little by little. The first thing he did was to send people to close the gate of the capital. Xiaoqing couldn't get out. She could only die of exhaustion in the city. No matter how strong a person was, no matter how strong a zombie was, there would be a time when they would be exhausted. He didn't mind sacrificing people's lives. Even if he had to sacrifice people's lives, he had to keep Xiaoqing. The Li family was finished the moment Li Yaowu died. Then Xiaoqing would be buried with the Li family and his son. When she was not far from the gate, Xiaoqing was already scarred. She carried the Air Dai and looked at the closed gate not far away. She had a headache. At this time, Xiaoqing suddenly heard some unusual sounds. It seemed that many people were approaching the capital. There were also some people who didn't move in. They were crying and screaming in panic. Many people were banging on the city gate, trying to get it to open. Mr. Li's face changed. He quickly ordered people to go and see what was going on. Someone went up the wall and looked outside. He was so scared that he almost fell down. He rolled and crawled over, then said, No, zombies are surrounding the city. Why would zombies suddenly surround the city at this time? There were no signs at all. With the addition of Xiaoqing, no matter how stupid old man Li was, he knew that the zombie siege had something to do with Xiaoqing. He gritted his teeth and said, This must be Xiaoqing's scheme. We must not open the city gates. But there are still thousands of people outside. The zombies are surrounding the city. If we don't let them in, they will all die. Someone whispered. A cold glint flashed across old Master Li's eyes. He said firmly, No matter what, we can't open the city gates. He must kill Xiaoqing today. No matter what, he had to kill Xiaoqing. At this time, many people rushed over from the city. The leaders were none other than Zhu Machun and Qin Zishi. They said expressionlessly, Open the city gates. Let the people outside in. Old Master Li led his men to block Xiaoqing and the others. He said coldly, Who dares to open the city gate? Although he was very resolute, the people under him were already wavering. They all whispered, Don't worry. There are tens of thousands of our own people outside the city. It's too cruel to leave them outside, open the city gates. My brother is still outside. That's right, my second aunt is also outside, we can't just watch them die. In any case, we can't keep Xiaoqing here. Old Master Li was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood. He protected the city gates, his eyes bloodshot. He roared, Who dares to open the city gates? Xiaoqing looked at him. After a while, she said, so a person's selfishness is this scary. A person like you can't even compare to a demon like me, so you can also go die. As soon as she finished speaking, Old Master Li suddenly twitched. Then, he knelt on the ground. Many green sprouts drilled out of his 7 orifices. He didn't know when, but Shao Qing had planted daughter in his body. After Old Master Li died, no one stopped Qin Zishi and the others from opening the gates. The heavy city gates slowly opened. Shao Qing raised her head and saw many familiar people standing among the zombies. The one at the front was actually Yin Yi. Compared to the humans who were pointing their swords at them, the zombies were actually so cute. Chapter 4:16. Shao Qing carried Dai on her back and walked out slowly. When she left the city gate, she looked back at the others. Everyone was looking at her with concern. There was no fear or disgust towards zombies in their eyes. They still treated her as a friend. This made Shao Qing feel much better. She waved her hand and walked towards Yin Yi. Yan Hanqing and the others were standing beside Yin Yi. When they saw Shao Qing coming over, they couldn't help but go forward to greet her. I'm fine. Shao Qing's voice was a little hoarse. She said in a low voice, thank you. Yin Yi was expressionless, but there was a trace of a smile in his eyes. We're all friends. You don't have to thank me. You can't stay here. Why don't you go to Jiang City? Shao Qing nodded and said, let's go. She knew that once the fact that she was a zombie was exposed, it meant that she would be far away from human cities. Even if her friends didn't care, the ordinary people would be afraid and resist. Therefore, she might not step into the capital for the rest of her life. Shao Qing couldn't help but apologize to Gu Panpan and the others, I'm sorry. She hesitated and said, no matter if it's the small bases in the south or the north, there are definitely many people who don't know about your identities. You have a lot of crystal nuclei in my hands. Let's divide them and find a small base to settle down. It didn't matter to her and Dai. Dai was a zombie, so was Little Bun. As for Yan Qiue, he probably wouldn't want to be separated from her even if he was beaten to death. But what about Gu Panpan and the others? They were all normal humans. If they went to Jiang City, they would be surrounded by zombies. Who would be able to stand it? Even if they knew that the zombies wouldn't do anything to them, they would still be worried. They were afraid that they would wake up one day and be surrounded by zombies. Even if Shao Qing didn't want to leave, she had to admit that Gu Panpan and the others were no longer suitable for her to be with them. After the apocalypse, except for the first few days, she had almost always been with Gu Panpan and the others. Now that they were suddenly separated, Shao Qing was full of reluctance. Gu Panpan widened her eyes and said angrily, Sister Qing, what do you mean? You don't want us anymore. Shao Qing patted her head and said, that's not what I meant. I just feel that this is more suitable for you. And little Tong, I hope you can take her away and take good care of her. I'm not leaving. Gu Panpan's eyes were a little red. I'll follow you wherever you go. Sister Qing, please don't chase me away. Shao Tong didn't know how to speak. She just clutched the corner of Shao Qing's clothes tightly. Her eyes were full of fear. She was afraid that she would be abandoned by Shao Qing. Even when she was beaten to death by her father, she was not so afraid. Yan Hanqing didn't say a word. He just stood behind her silently. Shao Qing had a headache. She looked at the others and then looked at the others. Finally, she compromised, if you don't like living here, just tell me. It's the same if you move out. Gu Panpan nodded quickly. But in her heart, she was afraid that she would never tell Shao Qing to leave. She was still looking forward to Gu Chuan marrying Shao Qing. A group of people and zombies walked back. After walking for a short distance, they stopped to take a rest. Yan Qiue's face was still very pale, but he was much better. He rested his head on Xiao Qing's thigh and whispered to Xiao Qing to discuss. I've studied it for a long time. Finally, I found that there is probably something that can restrain the special energy in Air Dai's wound. Yan Qiue said, this kind of energy is cold. I think we can go to the crater to have a look. The plants growing near it should have enough heat to restrain this kind of energy. Chapter 4:17. There was nothing invincible in the world. No matter how powerful something was, it would have its nemesis. They just hadn't found it yet. Xiao Qing gritted her teeth and said, can Air Dai maintain his current condition? Yan Qiue continued, no problem. With me around, his life won't be in danger for the time being. It should be enough for us to find a solution. Xiao Qing calculated and then said, there are no volcanoes in our country. That is to say, if we want to find volcanoes, we can either go to the sea to find volcanoes or go to the island. Isn't there a Mount Futu there? It's quite a famous volcano. Yan Qiue rested his head on her soft thighs and suggested, let Han Qing and the rest settle down. After that, we will set off and head south. We will definitely find it. If we can't find it, we can go to Japan. Xiao Qing nodded and said, you don't have to go this time. Stay at home and help me take care of my son. Xiao Qing was actually selfish. Yan Qiue and Little Bun had always been on bad terms. Xiao Qing hoped that Yan Qiue could improve their relationship. After all, she was sure that she liked Yan Qiue and Yan Qiue liked her too. They would definitely be together in the future. If Yan Qiue and Little Bun didn't get along well, she would have a headache being stuck in the middle. Yan Qiue refused without hesitation, no, I have to go with you this time no matter what. Firstly, Air Dai's condition is uncertain. If I don't go with you, what will you do if his condition suddenly worsens? Secondly, do you know what kind of plant can restrain the evil energy in his wound? Don't tell me you can bring some back. I will go with you. We can try a few more times and study it. Maybe we can solve it on the spot and everyone will be happy. Xiao Qing stroked his short hair helplessly and said softly, but you are injured too. My injury isn't serious. I can recuperate as we go. You know that my body recovers very quickly. Yan Qiue hugged Xiao Qing's thighs tightly and whined. All right. Xiao Qing patted Yan Qiue's head and said, we shouldn't delay this matter any further. When we reach Jiang City and settle everyone down, we'll leave. Yan Qiue also nodded. She was quite happy in her heart. Although there was an extra Air Dai, and it was not a honeymoon, the three of them went out and there was no one around. There were no men who were eyeing Xiao Qing covetously. It was quite nice to have a threesome. It was very suitable for nurturing feelings. Jiang City was in the south. The further south they went, the more humid and warm the weather was. Xiao Qing liked this kind of weather. Jiang City was near the longest river in the country. It was surrounded by mountains and water. The environment was very good. This was originally a big city in the country. After the apocalypse it was occupied by zombies, so no one dared to approach it. Yin Yi and his friends occupied the mountain and lived a comfortable life. Once they reached Jiang City, Yin Yi waved his hand and said generously, you can choose any house in the whole city. You can live wherever you want. This kind of generosity was full of the taste of a fish pond owner. Xiao Qing's mouth twitched. In the end, she chose a villa. It was near Yin Ye's residence. Yin Yi and his friends lived next door. The surrounding area was fenced. With Yin Ye's order, no zombies would come near. Xiao Qing specially discussed with Yin Yi about this. After all, she would not be around for a long time. Therefore, she was particularly worried about her friends. What if some zombies accidentally hurt them? Yin Yi solved this problem quickly. He left the scent of a zombie king on Yan Hanqing and the others. In this way, no bold zombies would dare to attack Yan Hanqing and the others. Chapter 4:18. Actually, living in Jiang City wasn't bad. The environment was good and it was quiet. The only problem was that there were 3 meals a day. Yin Yi and the others weren't human anymore and didn't need to eat, but Yan Hanqing and the others did. This caused them to have to go out and get some food from time to time. Xiao Qing took a look and renovated the small garden in the villa. She asked Gu Panpan and the others to plant some vegetables and fruits. Then she went out to find a granary and moved a lot of food back. This way, they wouldn't have to go out so often. After everything was arranged, Xiao Qing was about to leave. Before she left, she called her friends and Yin Yi over and gave them a detailed explanation. The one she was most worried about was Little Bun. Xiao Qing hugged Little Bun and felt sad. Listen to Aunt Panpan and the others at home, okay? Mommy will be back soon. Little Bun was very sensible. He patted Xiao Qing's back and said, Mommy, you must cure Dai Dai. I will be obedient. Also, I will miss Mommy. Before Xiao Qing left, she kept looking back at the Little Bun with every step she took. Looking at the Little Bun made her feel a lot weaker, and she wanted to cry. However, when she thought of Dai, she gritted her teeth and left. Yan Qiue was still injured, so Xiao Qing carried Dai on her back. The 3 of them continued to walk south. The further south they went, the more humid the air became. On the 3rd day after leaving Jiang City, Dai finally woke up from her coma. On the other hand, in Jiang City, Little Bun was like a fish in water. He wasn't a normal child. In the past, he didn't have many friends except for Qin Zishi. This time, he made another friend. This friend was called Xiaoyu. He was a zombie baby. Except for the strange hobby of living in his friend's chest, he was a very good friend. Xiaoyu was a little younger than Little Bun. He liked to play with Little Bun. For this reason, he even abandoned his little friend, the owner of the chest, Short Hair. Xiaoyu couldn't walk yet. He could only crawl. Every time he went out to play with Little Bun would carry him. The 2 steamed buns quickly became the overlords of Rivertown. They also often went to the long river behind Jiang City to play, catch fish, pile sand and so on. Usually, Xiao Tong would follow them. Sometimes, Gu Panpan or Yan Hanqing would follow them. They were busy farming recently. When they had no time, Yin Yi would arrange some senior zombies to secretly guard them. One day, when Little Bun was piling sand with his little friends, a little girl suddenly came out of the reeds and pounced on Little Bun without saying a word, giving Little Bun a fright. As soon as the little girl pounced on them, she bared her teeth fiercely. She probably wanted to devour Little Bun and Little Fish. After all, Little Bun and Little Fish were not low-level zombies. Then, the Little Bun stretched out his hand and grabbed the little girl's wrist. The little girl immediately panicked. She only felt the energy in her body continuously flowing into the Little Bun's body. She was so scared that she turned into a cloud of mist. Yes, she was the little girl zombie who fought with Xiao Qing and Dai. She was also the one who seriously injured Dai. However, she was unlucky. She wanted to come out to hunt for her own kind and recover her body. Coincidentally, she met Little Bun, who was the bane of her. As soon as the cloud of mist appeared, it quickly rushed to Little Bun. Little Bun's devouring speed increased a lot. Xiaoyu also giggled at the side. He pounced on the little girl and swallowed a mouthful of mist. Then, he burped contentedly. Even Yi looked down on her. The little girl's trump card was to turn into a cloud of mist. When she turned into mist, no one could hurt her. Therefore, no matter if she ran or did anything, she would be at a disadvantage. Chapter 4:19. But today, the more she turned into mist, the faster she was swallowed. The little girl was so scared that she quickly returned to her human form. She couldn't escape or fight, so she had to beg for mercy. She made a pitiful sound, hoping that Little Bun would let her go. Little Bun also burped. Although the little girl was injured and couldn't defeat him, she was still a level 5 zombie. If he swallowed her, he would probably be stuffed to death. Little Bun had an idea. He asked the little girl, "Do you want to be my wife? I'll let you go if you become my wife." In fact, this was what he was thinking in his heart. Do Diju was missing one person. No, it was missing one person to play house. He just happened to be missing a girl equals V equals this one looked cute and could act as the child's mother. The little girl nodded quickly and looked at Little Bun pitifully. She thought that as long as Little Bun let her go, she would turn into a cloud of mist and run away. She would never get close to this scary place again. Then, Little Bun excitedly dragged the little girl back to Jiang City. He didn't let go during the whole process. The little girl couldn't run at all. Every time she wanted to turn into mist, a devouring power would come from Little Bun's hand. On the way back, they met Xiao Tong who was looking for him. Little Bun happily said to Xiao Tong, "Sister Tong, I caught a wife, but I'm afraid she'll run away." Xiao Tong looked at the little girl zombie and completely treated her as Little Bun's toy. Hearing Little Bun's words, she released her spirit power and locked on the crystal nucleus in the little girl zombie's brain. Just as the little girl was about to resist, she was locked onto by the devouring energy again. Xiao Tong took the opportunity to stab down and deeply branded her spiritual power into the little girl's crystal core. Then, she left another brand in Little Bun's body. It was like a shackle that locked the little girl, but the other end was in Little Bun's hand. As long as the little girl tried to run away, Little Bun could directly use his mind to destroy the little girl's crystal nucleus. This was the new ability Xiao Tong obtained after her breakthrough. Little Bun was very happy. He hugged Xiao Tong and took a bite. Then, he hugged his little friend and led the little girl out to play. The little girl was speechless. This was the legendary capsizing in the gutter. The little girl who had failed miserably was not prepared to wait for death. She was secretly thinking about how to escape. Just as she was thinking of a plan, she saw the Little Bun come over with a smile. Then, his eyes lit up as he said, "Let's play house. I'll be the father and you'll be the mother. Ye is the baby and Xiaoyu is my brother." The little girl's eyes flickered. No one knew what she was thinking. Then, she saw the Little Bun smile, but his gaze was very dangerous. "Are you thinking about how to run?" The little girl felt that although she was a zombie, she still felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly shook her head. The Little Bun smiled happily. "Then let's play." Xiao Qing, who had no idea that her baby had become a black-hearted sesame bun, was hunting at this moment, preparing to make soup for Yan Qiue. Although Yan Qiue's health had improved a lot because of her, it wasn't something that could be done in a day or two. She couldn't stop when she was almost done. She needed to take care of her body over a long period of time to ensure that her body was always in good health. Other than making soup, Xiao Qing was also thinking about another thing. That was, how to cross the sea and reach Japan. In the past few days, she had brought Yan Qiue and Air Dai to many places and found many things. However, there was nothing that could suppress the strange energy in Air Dai's wound. Because of this, Xiao Qing decided that she would go out to sea and directly go to Japan. She couldn't delay it for too long. Even if Idiot's body could bear it, she couldn't bear seeing the huge injuries and the pale and weak Idiot every day. However, if they wanted to go to sea, the first thing they needed was a boat. If they didn't have a boat, they wouldn't be able to reach Japan. However, where could they find a boat after the apocalypse? Even if they could find one, who knew how to drive it? Therefore, Xiao Qing happily decided to build a boat by herself. Yan Qiue was speechless when he heard this decision. Chapter 420. This was already the third day that Xiao Qing and the others had been drifting on the sea. Originally, Xiao Qing had planned to make a small boat by herself and slowly drift towards Japan. Unexpectedly, when they arrived at the seaside, they saw many fishing boats, ornamental boats, motorboats, and the like. It was useless to have a boat, someone had to drive it. Xiao Qing originally wanted to find a base nearby. In such a base near the sea, there must be former fishermen who knew how to drive a boat. As for whether they were willing to go that far and cross the sea to Japan, Xiao Qing said that although the nuclei were not omnipotent, it was still very useful in some situations. However, Xiao Qing did not know if it was because they were too lucky. While looking for a boat, they found a person. It was a young boy, at most 20 years old. His healthy wheat-colored skin was infinitely close to bronze. Then, he was entangled by an octopus and dragged into the sea. The sea was probably the most dangerous place after the apocalypse. There were too many marine creatures in the sea. After the mutation, most of the marine creatures had very high attack power. Moreover, the sea was unfathomable. No one knew what kind of giant creatures lived at the bottom of the sea. This octopus probably came to the beach to hunt, or it might have been washed up by the tide. The boy did not know what he was doing at the beach, but he was treated as prey. Xiao Qing stared at the huge octopus. Her eyes were deep. After a while, she asked Yan Qiue, "Do you want to eat grilled squid tentacles?" Yan Qiue looked at her. Her eyes were shining. She guessed that the person who really wanted to eat was her. Yan Qiue's mouth twitched. Then, she said, "Why don't we save him? Maybe he knows how to drive a boat. That way, we don't have to look everywhere." Xiao Qing, who had found another gay friend, happily tied up the octopus that was taller than a person. The boy was already in despair. He closed his eyes and waited for death. Suddenly, his body jolted. He opened his eyes and found that he was suspended in midair. His body was still wrapped by the tentacles of the octopus. However, the octopus was already in midair. The octopus was hung upside down by the green vines. In front of the youth stood a woman. She pulled out a knife and slashed down, causing the youth to fall headfirst onto the beach. Xiao Qing picked up the squid tentacle that tied the young man up. The squid tentacle was still alive and was still wriggling. It was very fresh. She pinched the soft and slippery squid tentacles and said to Yan Qiue and the others very seriously, "Let's have squid for lunch today. We can grill the squid tentacles. The squid tentacles can be grilled on a teppanyaki. We have a grill, so grilled squid will definitely taste good. The rest can be shredded and added with eggs to make soup. It's a pity that we don't have chives. You can save some for when you have chives." Yan Qiue touched his chin and said. Xiao Qing was very happy about this. "You're right. Before we go out to sea, we can look around and see if there are any vegetables that I didn't bring. We can collect some more." Listening to the two of them discussing how to deal with the octopus, the young man was dumbfounded. After the discussion, Xiao Qing asked the young man, "Do you know how to sail?" The young man was stunned for a long time. Then, he nodded subconsciously. "That's great." Xiao Qing felt that she had done a great job saving the young man. She had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. It really couldn't be better. Xiao Qing bent down and patted the young man's shoulder. "Young man, can I discuss something with you?" The young man was still dumbfounded. "What is it?" "It's like this. I'm preparing to go to Japan. However, I don't know how to sail, so I want to hire you to sail. As for the remuneration, you can choose crystal cores or food," Xiao Qing said very seriously. Chapter 421. She had prepared herself for that. If the young man didn't agree, she would tie him up and put him on the boat. By then, he would have to move forward. The young man stared at Xiao Qing for a long time and then asked in a low voice, "Is food okay?" Xiao Qing waved her hand and said, "No problem. Since I'm hiring you, you can ask for anything. As long as it's not too much, I can satisfy you." The young man knew that once they went to the sea, they would have a slim chance of survival. There were too many unpredictable dangers, from mutated sea creatures, especially large sea creatures that could be called sea monsters, to tornadoes, tsunamis, underwater volcanic eruptions, reefs, and so on. There were all kinds of dangers. As long as one of them was triggered, it would be enough to kill them. However, Xiao Qing's conditions were too good. He couldn't bear to give up. He could see that Xiao Qing was a powerful paranormal. She must have a lot of food in her hands. If he could use this to exchange for some food, he could let his brothers and sisters live a good life for a while. This time, he was targeted by the octopus because he came out to look for food. Every time the tide went out, there would be a lot of oysters, seashells, small fish, and the like left on the beach. He just wanted to pick up some of these and bring them back for his brothers and sisters to eat. In the post-apocalyptic world, not everyone lived as well as Xiao Qing and the others. More people were like the young man. They didn't have enough to eat and struggled in the post-apocalyptic world. He sniffed and said with a crying voice, "I'll drive the boat for you. Can you give me 2 more bags of food?" "Okay." Xiao Qing said generously. Before leaving, she had emptied several granaries with her friends. Most of the granaries had been brought back to Jiang City by her friends. She only brought back 20 bags of rice, a few bags of flour, and some red beans and mung beans to cook porridge. The young man was a little surprised. His cheeks flushed, and then he whispered, "Can you let me go back and settle down before I go with you?" "Sure, we also need to buy some things. Where do you live? Let's go back together." Xiao Qing glanced at the octopus that was still struggling and dissected it with a military knife expressionlessly. She threw away the soft bones, the ink sac, and the internal organs, the delicious squid tentacles and meat, and threw them into the space. The teenager who was stunned by Xiao Qing's cruelty, QAQ the young man lived in a small base near the seaside. The base wasn't big, and the entire base only had about 200 to 300 people. It wasn't even as big as a mercenary group. It was said that the base was built by many fishermen after the apocalypse. Most of the people were from the same village, so the atmosphere was quite harmonious. The young man led them into the base. Because of the young man's guidance, they were not checked and went straight in. Upon returning to the youth's home, many children came out under the lead of a young girl to welcome the youth. There were 4 or 5 of them, the oldest 7 or 8 years old, and the youngest 4 or 5 years old. The youth said, "Let me introduce." At this time, he remembered that he hadn't introduced himself, so he said shyly, "My name is Feng Lan, and this is my sister, Feng Yu. My sister is a kindergarten teacher. These children are the lucky survivors of our village. They are living with us now." Xiao Qing also introduced herself and Yan Chiua briefly. After entering the house, she began to move the food out. There were 15 bags of rice. She left 5 bags for the journey, 3 bags of flour, and some vegetables and jerky that she had stored. The Feng siblings were stunned. Chapter 422. "This is the reward we agreed on," Xiao Qing said lightly, "I don't know if it's enough. This is the most I can give you now." "Enough. Enough." Feng Lan murmured. He thought that it would be good if Xiao Qing could give him 3 to 5 bags of food. He didn't expect Xiao Qing to be so generous. Feng Yu grasped the key point and looked at Feng Lan in confusion. Feng Lan bit his lips and explained, "I'm going out to sea with Sister Qing. We'll be back soon. You stay at home and take care of Air Bao and the others." Feng Yu trembled. She knew how dangerous the sea was, especially after Doomsday. It was nice to say that there was a slim chance of survival. But she had no choice. There were several children at home. They couldn't afford it. If they had the food, they wouldn't have to worry about the children not having anything to eat for at least a year and a half. Come back soon. Feng Yu said with a trembling voice. Xiao Qin couldn't bear to see them separated forever. He patted Feng Yu's shoulder and said, as long as I'm alive, I won't let anything happen to your brother. Don't worry. We'll come back safely. After comforting the two siblings, Yan Qiue was sent out by Xiao Qin to buy food. Then she settled Er Dai down and let Er Dai rest aside. She went to the kitchen. The squid's tentacles were very long. Xiao Qin cut them into pieces. They could be barbecued or fried on an iron plate. As for the other parts, Xiao Qin cut them into squid rings and meat strips. Some of them were used for barbecuing, and some were used for stewing soup and stir-frying. This afternoon, this group of people would eat this octopus. Yan Qiue quickly bought some seaweed, kelp, and other vegetables that could only be found by the seaside. She also bought some chives that were grown in the base. He still remembered that Xiao Qin said that she wanted to eat shredded squid with chives. The charcoal and barbecue grill were ready-made. Xiao Qin set up a barbecue grill that was half iron plate and half empty. It was the kind of grill that was usually used for barbecuing mutton skewers. This way, they could directly grill squid on a teppanyaki and barbecue it. When Yan Qiue came back, she saw that Xiao Qin was surrounded by a circle of children. Everyone was eagerly looking at Xiao Qin, who was grilling squid tentacles on a metal plate. After pouring a little oil on it, the tender squid tentacles were strung together and sizzled as they were roasted on the iron plate. The fragrance wafted out just like that. She also cut a little onion and sprinkled it on top. Then, she brushed it with a layer of chili oil and sesame oil. When it was almost roasted, she sprinkled a little cumin, and it was ready to eat. She didn't put a lot of chili oil in consideration of the children's problems. The children ate until their mouths were full of oil. They looked at Xiao Qin with eyes full of admiration. Xiao Qin had the illusion that she had become a chef. On the other side, the barbecue section was more diverse. There were roasted leeks, roasted potatoes, meat slices, and most importantly, squid tentacles. After feeding everyone, Xiao Qin patted her stomach and was very satisfied. Then, she set off with Feng Lan. Feng Yu took the children and reluctantly sent them off. Xiao Qin led the three of them to pick a boat that was neither big nor small. It could be controlled by one person, and it could withstand the wind and rain. It could also travel long distances. Just like that, they set off. Feng Lan was the busiest because he was in charge of sailing the boat. The second busiest was Xiao Qin because she was in charge of cooking. Yan Qiue and Er Dai were very leisurely on the deck every day. There were also fishing nets and the like on the boat. When they stopped to rest at night, Feng Lan would cast the net and catch some fish. These fresh sea fish would be picked by Xiao Qin and the others. They would throw back those that were too small, throw back those that were not delicious, and leave the delicious ones to enrich their 3 meals. Chapter 423. Sometimes, Xiao Qin would make some fish porridge or something. In short, life was very leisurely. When they were lucky, they could even catch 2 hairy crabs. These crabs had purple shells and tasted much better than ordinary crabs. Xiao Qin was addicted to it the first time she ate it. Every day, she hoped that Feng Lan could catch 2 more crabs. Other than these crabs, the most popular one was the prawn. In short, there were many delicious things. They ate more than when they were on land. Xiao Qin cooked 3 meals a day in different ways. Every day, she would cook at least 4 dishes and 1 soup. Especially the soup, they were all different. Today, it might be fish soup. Tomorrow, it would be seaweed and egg soup. The day after that, it would be seaweed and meat soup. When they first went out to sea, Feng Lan was still thin. In just a few days, he gained a few pounds and his face became much rounder. Time to eat. She instructed Yan Qiue to set the table on the deck and then brought the dishes over plate by plate. Xiao Qing stretched her head out and called Feng Lan. Only then did Feng Lan come out to eat. Come, eat more. Xiao Qing put a lot of meat on Feng Lan's plate. When Feng Lan first came out with them, he was very thin. Xiao Qing remembered that Feng Lan took a bath once. Actually, it wasn't a bath. They were already at sea and needed very rare fresh water resources. Therefore, they just took a towel and dipped it in water and then wiped their bodies. When Xiao Qing came down to the deck, she walked into the wrong room and then saw it. She was a little embarrassed because she felt like a pervert who barged into someone's room. In the end, she saw that Feng Lan was wearing pants and was pitifully thin. He looked like he was wrapped in skin and bones. His ribs were protruding, and his arms and legs were small. He didn't look like a person in his 20s at all. At that time, Feng Lan was so shy that he reached out to cover his chest. Xiao Qing couldn't help but say, I told you to eat more during the day, but you were still shy. Look at how thin you are. It must hurt my hand to touch you. Then she suddenly realized that her words sounded like she was flirting. She coughed and said, I didn't mean that I wanted to touch it. I meant that it looked like it would hurt my hand to touch it. The more she explained, the more confused she became. She hurriedly ran away. Yan Qiue was a little jealous when he saw Xiao Qing picking up food for Feng Lan. He grumbled until Xiao Qing also picked up a pile of food for him. Only then was he appeased. In the end, Xiao Qing put a pile of soup into each of their bowls. After the meal, Feng Lan remembered that there was still business. He said seriously, if we go further, there will be a group of submerged reefs. We can't go around them. After all, this route is known. If we take a detour, it will be unknown. A known danger is always safer than an unknown one. Little brother, drive forward boldly. Xiao Qing, who almost sang, coughed to cover it up and said, since I chose you, I believe in you. It was obviously the first time that Feng Lan had traveled so far out to sea. He was also alone. Without an experienced veteran who was familiar with this route, it was natural that he would be nervous. However, he had taken someone's money to avoid disaster. Moreover, he was not only holding Xiao Qing's and the others' lives in his hands, but also his own. If he wanted to go back alive to see his sister and the others, he had to drive carefully. After dinner, they lay side by side on the deck and watched the sun gradually set. Feng Lan found a safe place to stop the boat and cast the anchor. They would rest here tonight. When the sky gradually darkened and the wind started to blow, Xiao Qing went down the deck, one in each hand, and went back to her room to sleep. Because of his injury, Dai was the most pitiful. He had to sleep on his own bed. However, in order to observe Dai's injury at all times, Dai slept in Xiao Qing's room. However, another bed was set up opposite the original bed for Dai to sleep on. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue slept on the other bed. For this reason, Dai kept looking at Xiao Qing with resentment. He wanted to sleep with Xiao Qing. He wanted to hug Xiao Qing. He wanted to hug Xiao Qing. After making up her mind, Xiao Qing no longer felt awkward when she slept with the two of them. She often lay on the bed generously and pulled them into her arms. She hugged them tightly and slept however she wanted. Baby, good night. Xiao Qing pinched Yan Qiue's chin and kissed the tip of his nose. Then, she ignored the resentful Dai and went to sleep. According to Feng Lan's words, it would be very dangerous when they entered the reefs. At that time, they would have to be alert at all times and couldn't sleep well. Therefore, they should sleep well before they reached the reefs. Yan Qiue also leaned forward and kissed Xiao Qing's lips. He was very satisfied. Good night, dear. Air die, QAQ, you're abusing the wounded. Chapter 424. They officially arrived at the reefs at noon the next day. The reefs here were very dense. From afar, one could see the tip of a black reef sticking out of the water. Occasionally, seagulls would land on it to rest. Only a small portion was exposed. Most of the reefs were hidden underwater, waiting for passing ships to sail into the reefs. Then, they would use their not-so-sharp tips to destroy the bottom of the ship. Once the bottom of the ship was flooded, the ship would sink in a short period of time. In this vast sea, there was nothing but seawater as far as the eye could see. Once the ship sank, there was no other possibility other than drowning. Therefore, the reefs were a very dangerous existence for passing ships. They were second only to tornadoes. In terms of the number of ships that sank in the reefs and tornadoes, there were more ships that sank in the reefs. Before entering the group of submerged reefs, Feng Lan was extremely nervous. There was a safe channel in this group of submerged reefs that could accommodate large ships. Those veterans who often used this channel were naturally very familiar with it. However, a newcomer like him would be buried at the bottom of the sea if he was not careful. Feng Lan was quite afraid. He still had a few siblings at home waiting for him to return and raise them. As long as he could return alive, who would be willing to die? He had made a lot of mental preparations before embarking on this channel. After all, once a ship sailed in, there was no way to turn back. They could only walk to the end. They would either drown there or leave safely. Compared to Feng Lan, Xiaoqing and company were much calmer. Firstly, they didn't know how to sail a ship. Even if they were nervous, it was useless. Anyway, there was no way they could help Feng Lan steer. Secondly, they didn't know how terrifying the reefs were. The sea was tolerant and terrifying. When they first entered the reefs, it was relatively smooth. Feng Lan carefully followed the map and followed the safe channel forward, afraid that he would take a wrong step. Xiaoqing leaned on the railing of the deck and looked out. On both sides of the railing, she could see small pieces of reef sticking out of the water. Occasionally, she could see wooden planks hanging from the reefs or tattered cloth. If she was lucky, she could even see the bones of unknown creatures. It was unknown how much time had passed, but the bones were already decayed white. It was as though they would turn to dust with a touch. These were probably ships that had sunk in this area of the sea. After many years of weathering, they had become what they were today. Xiaoqing observed carefully for a while. Yan Qiue carried half of the watermelon over for her to eat. She held the watermelon and picked up a spoon to eat it. She was halfway through eating the watermelon when the boat under her feet suddenly shook violently. Her first reaction was to think that they had hit a reef. Then, Xiaoqing saw something climb up from the bottom of the boat, through the guardrail, and onto the deck. The wriggling tentacles were very familiar. They were clearly the squid feet they had eaten a few days ago. The chewy and delicious taste was still rolling in their mouths. Xiaoqing swallowed the watermelon in her mouth and smacked her lips. She felt that there might be something delicious to eat for lunch today. Without another word, she stuffed half of the watermelon into Yan Qiue's arms and jumped onto the guardrail. She looked down and stretched out her head, only to see an octopus tentacle stabbing straight at her face. It's so thick. I wonder if it'll taste better if I add some mustard. Xiaoqing bit her nails and thought for a moment. Then, she grabbed the octopus tentacle that flew over with one hand and took out a knife with the other hand. She cut it off. The thing under the water probably felt the pain. Countless tentacles kept stirring the water, causing the entire boat to sway. Chapter 425. Feng Lan ran out of the control room and said anxiously, "Sister Qing, if this goes on, the boat will hit the reefs on both sides. That would be the end of them." Xiaoqing nodded, jumped up, and jumped down. The big guy in the water came out. Its head was black, and its eyes were much bigger than fists. So ugly. Xiao Qing pinched her nose and landed on the big guy's head with the military knife. Her goal now was to kill it directly and then turn it into lunch. Such a big octopus could be eaten for several days. It just so happened that the one she caught last time was too small. She didn't have enough to eat before it was gone. Xiao Qing happily inserted the knife into the octopus's head. This octopus's skin was too thick. Even after the military knife was inserted, it probably couldn't pierce through the subcutaneous fat. However, it clearly felt pain, so it kept struggling. Its squid feet slapped the water full of waves. Xiao Qing's boat swayed and looked like it was about to hit the reefs. Fortunately, Feng Lan was very reliable. He controlled the boat and didn't hit the reefs. However, if this big guy was allowed to make waves, hitting the reefs was inevitable. Xiao Qing frowned. It was easy to kill this octopus, but she didn't expect that thick skin also had its benefits. This octopus was too big, and its internal organs couldn't be hurt. So even if Xiao Qing's attack could hurt it, there was no way to kill it. Xiao Qing was in a bad mood for a moment. She let the vine stretch out and trapped the big guy in the center. Then, she kept tightening until the big guy couldn't move. Xiao Qing held the military knife and looked up and down. However, the length of a military knife was about the same as a dagger. Even if it reached the handle, it couldn't kill this big guy. She had to give up on using the knife. Then, she found the small wound she had torn with the military knife and inserted her 10 fingers. Xiao Qing's sharp nails pierced through the big guy's head and into his arm. As long as Xiao Qing moved her fingers, she could feel the soft flesh. It was said that every tentacle of an octopus had a brain, but it only had 3 hearts. Xiao Qing counted as she dug. Sure enough, there were 3. The poor creature kept spitting out ink, and the blue blood gushed out of its body. When it mixed with the seawater, it was indistinguishable. After confirming that the big guy was dead, Xiao Qing tied its legs with vines and dragged it onto the deck. The huge octopus was like a mountain of meat, lying softly on the deck. Xiao Qing grabbed one of the octopus legs and pinched it. The suckers on it were very annoying, and it was very sticky. "We can eat octopus for lunch again," Xiao Qing touched her nose and said seriously, "I really want to eat shredded octopus with wasabi." Yan Qiue hugged half of the watermelon, kicked the octopus, and said, "How long will it take for us to finish eating such a big one? Won't we get sick of it? Let's talk about it later if we can't finish it." Xiao Qing waved her hand and was already thinking about how to eat it. This octopus probably lived in the nearby sea and happened to meet them when it came out to hunt. Xiao Qing thought so. Later, she found that it was not so simple, because they grilled a lot of octopus, and there was also the wasabi shredded octopus that Xiao Qing wanted to eat. She held the plate and leaned against the railing, eating while looking at the sea. Then, she found that many large sea creatures were leaving the sea area as if they were fleeing. There were groups of umbrella-shaped jellyfish, sharks, whales, all kinds of fish, and many large, medium, and small fish that Xiao Qing did not know. They were all running in one direction. Chapter 426. Yan Qiue was dumbfounded. He seemed to have heard Xiao Qing say that she was willing to marry him. No. She was willing to marry him. Was he hallucinating? Was what he had just heard true? Yan Qiue secretly pinched his thigh. He thought that his action was subtle, but Xiao Qing saw it all. Xiao Qing leaned on his back and laughed. Her laughter caused her chest to vibrate, which was then transmitted to Yan Qiue's body. That strange numbness once again took over Yan Qiue's body. Yan Qiue quietly took a breath. He couldn't help but turn over and hug Xiao Qing. "Is what you said true? You're not lying to me?" Xiao Qing covered his eyes and kissed him on the lips. When Air Dai went missing and you were seriously injured, I realized that I couldn't bear to lose either of you. Don't blame me for being greedy. Of course, if you don't want to, you can pretend that I didn't say anything. Before Yan Qiue could speak, Air Dai, who had been lying on the side, rushed over and forcibly separated the two of them. He leaned forward and kissed Xiaoqing. His eyes were full of anger. Ah, Qing is mine. Xiaoqing hugged Air Dai and Yan Qiue. She whispered, I once thought that this action was too shocking. How can one person love two people? But later, I thought about it carefully. I broke my heart into several pieces and gave them to the two of you. Why should I care about other people's gossip? I only care about whether the two of you are willing to accompany me. Yan Qiue didn't say anything and hugged Xiaoqing's waist tightly. He sighed and said, I never thought of monopolizing you because I know that you can't let go of Air Dai. To the two of you, I'm the latecomer. So I'm very satisfied now, but, he looked at Air Dai with some worry. Xiaoqing touched Air Dai's head and said, when he recovers his memory, it's best if he's willing to stay. If he wants to leave, I won't stop him. Not everyone could accept such a strange relationship between the three of them. Yan Qiue accepted it very well. He rubbed Xiaoqing's leg and said contentedly, I'm prepared to pursue you for the rest of my life. This happiness came too quickly. Xiaoqing patted his head and asked him to continue lying on his stomach. Then she held Air Dai and put him back on the other side of the bed. She told him, I have told you many times that you can't move because of the injury on your back. If you don't listen to me, I won't want you anymore. Air Dai grabbed the corner of the quilt and looked at Xiaoqing pitifully. Then, she was stuffed back into the quilt. After putting Air Dai back in, Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief and continued to scrub Yan Qiue's back. When she was scrubbing Yan Qiue's back again, it was a little ambiguous. After all, no matter what happened between them in the past, it wasn't right. But now, they were boyfriend and girlfriend, so it was normal for them to do whatever they wanted. However, Xiaoqing didn't want to do anything, so Yan Qiue gave her all kinds of hints. In the end, Xiaoqing just said calmly, go to sleep first. I'll go out and take a look. Then, Xiaoqing ignored Yan Qiue and went out. When she went up to the deck and looked at the bottom of the water again, she found more schools of fish running away. According to normal theory, if there was a fierce beast chasing behind them, it would be impossible for it to not catch up after a day. Moreover, there were many huge marine animals that were the overlords of the sea. They were also running for their lives, so it couldn't be a fierce beast. If it wasn't a fierce beast, it was very likely to be a natural disaster. If it was a natural disaster, it would be dangerous. If it was a fierce beast, she could still fight against it. If it was a natural disaster, although it was said that man could conquer nature, human beings were still too small in front of a natural disaster. Chapter 427. Especially now that they were in the middle of the vast sea, if some natural disaster happened and their ship was damaged, they would really be finished. Xiaoqing leaned against the railing and looked for a long time. She looked at the weather and then at the sea, but she didn't find anything out of the ordinary. At this time, Xiaoqing was a little sleepy and was about to go back to the cabin to sleep. She had just taken 2 steps when she felt the entire ship shake a few times. She felt a little uneasy, but it could also be that the marine animals in the water had touched the ship, causing it to shake. She frowned and stopped to look around again. She didn't find anything out of the ordinary, so she went back to the cabin to sleep. The next 2 days were peaceful. They didn't find anything suspicious, except for the sea creatures that kept swimming in the sea and rushing in another direction. It wasn't until noon the next day that they finally reached the edge of the reef group. They would be able to leave the reef group after another hour or so. Even Feng Lan couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But at this time, their ship suddenly shook violently. The patient, Yan Qiue, almost lost her balance and fell onto Xiaoqing. After the tremor, nothing happened. But in the next half an hour, such tremors kept happening. It could be an accident if it happened once or twice, but after so many times, she really couldn't comfort herself. Xiao Qing frowned and turned around. Suddenly, she felt that something was wrong. Not far away, some fish suddenly floated up with their bellies facing up. She looked carefully. At first, she didn't find anything out of the ordinary, but when she looked carefully, she found that there were small bubbles on the surface of the water. At first, they were really small bubbles, but slowly, the bubbles started to get bigger and bigger. Then, like small fountains, they formed on the surface of the sea. For words suddenly flashed in Xiao Qing's mind: underwater earthquake. She couldn't care about anything else. She ran to the door of the control room and shouted, "Speed up immediately and leave this area quickly. Don't worry about whether we hit the reef or not." Feng Lan didn't know what was going on. He looked at Xiao Qing blankly. Xiao Qing said anxiously, "It's either an earthquake or an underwater volcano eruption. If we're late, we'll all die here." Feng Lan was so scared that his face turned pale. Without another word, he began to speed up. In order to speed up, he measured the direction of the wind and raised the sail. The entire ship was like an arrow released from a bow, quickly rushing forward, completely disregarding whether or not it would sink if it hit a reef at such a speed. Perhaps it was because his life was in danger, but Feng Lan simply performed exceptionally well. The boat whooshed on the surface of the water and perfectly avoided the reefs. Just as they were about to rush out of the group of reefs, the surface of the water, which had been bubbling all this time, suddenly rumbled and spewed out a black-gray substance. It was probably water mixed with some kind of mud-like substance. Then, it spewed out more than 10 meters high. The abnormal movement on the surface of the water directly caused huge waves that swayed in all directions. The small boats that were affected seemed to be sailing on the top of the waves. At this time, Feng Lan was already doing his best. His hands were so fast that they left afterimages. Xiao Qing and the others didn't know how to sail a ship, so they couldn't help Feng Lan. They could only watch anxiously as more and more black-gray things erupted from the bottom of the sea. It was almost certain that it was indeed an underwater volcano eruption. This was only the early stage of the eruption. In the later stage, what would erupt would be magma. Generally speaking, even if an underwater volcano erupted, the magma would be cooled by the seawater and eventually form a volcanic island. However, this cooling process took a long time. Chapter 428. At least, Xiao Qing and the others couldn't wait any longer. Just as they were about to leave the reef, a huge wave suddenly caught up with them. Underwater volcanic eruptions had always been one of the main causes of tsunamis. If the eruption continued for a while, it would form a huge tsunami. Although it hadn't formed a tsunami yet, the wave was already very big. If such a wave hit them, their small boat would only end up broken. Splash! The wave hit the stern of the boat, causing the whole boat to jump up and down with the waves. Xiao Qing reached out her vines and tied them around Er Dai and Yan Qiue's waists. Then, she hugged the pillar tightly. She fixed the three of them on the boat. The waves came one after another, and the poor boat couldn't control its direction at all. If they hadn't been at the edge of the reef where there were fewer reefs, they might have hit the reef by now. Even so, Xiao Qing still had an illusion that the boat would fall apart in the next second. The power of nature was really not something that humans could resist. Facing such a natural disaster, even Xiao Qing, who was about to break through to level 6, could only resign herself to fate. Just as they left the reef and were sent out by the waves, a huge wave hit them head-on. "Oh no!" Xiao Qing exclaimed. She quickly reached out another vine and tied Feng Lan's waist. If the boat really fell apart, at least the four of them would still be together. Then, the boat would really fall apart. The huge wave hit the boat directly. Not to mention their small boat, even a huge ship would fall apart in an instant. Therefore, without any suspense, their boat was smashed into pieces of wood. The moment the wave hit the boat, Xiaoqing pulled them to her side with her vines. Then, she quickly released vines one after another, forming a huge protective sphere around her body. The moment the wave hit her, the huge force almost smashed her into pieces. Fortunately, her vines were very reliable. Under the wave's attack, they actually protected the few people in the vine barrier. Only Xiaoqing suffered the huge impact alone. Her face immediately turned pale, and then she spat out a mouthful of blood. She quickly spread out her vines and looked around. There were planks floating on the water. She picked a bigger one, climbed on it, and dragged the other 3 people up. The 4 of them hugged the wooden planks and floated up and down in the water pitifully. There were also huge waves that kept sweeping them away at a very fast speed, flying forward. Xiaoqing choked on the seawater and kept coughing. She struggled to say, "No matter what, don't let go of the planks in your hands. This is our only hope." Feng Lan's body was the weakest. At this moment, her vision was a little blurry. Seeing that she was about to faint, Xiaoqing gritted her teeth and tied Feng Lan directly to the planks with her vines. She lay there like a mattress. However, now was not the time to laugh. Erdai's wound could not be touched by water. Xiaoqing also pushed Erdai onto the planks. Only she and Yan Qiue floated in the water and hugged the edges of the planks. Sometimes, when a wave hit, they would be hit and sink to the bottom of the sea instantly. Then, they would slowly float up and continue to drift with the waves. Feng Lan was the first to faint. Then, Yan Qiue was the next to lose his strength. He was originally injured. Although he had almost recovered, his strength was still a little weak. If it were not for Xiaoqing's vines, he would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. Xiaoqing gritted her teeth and wiped the salty seawater off her face. Taking advantage of the fact that there were no waves crashing down, she looked into the distance. At this moment, the volcanic eruption had reached its most serious stage. Black volcanic ash and red magma were gushing out with seawater. The sea creatures closer to the center of the volcanic eruption were more pitiful. They were probably cooked in minutes and could be eaten directly. Xiaoqing was a little glad that she found it early. Otherwise, they might have been at the bottom of the sea now. Another wave hit. The planks could not bear it anymore. Xiaoqing had to use her vines to strengthen the planks to ensure that they would not fall apart for the time being. As long as they could hold on until they found a place to settle down. As the waves kept coming, they were pushed away from the center of the volcanic eruption little by little. So when the tsunami formed, they were already at the edge. Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. This time, they really escaped with their lives. However, a bigger problem had come. In this vast sea, surrounded by endless seawater, did they have to hold this plank and float directly to Japan? Chapter 429. The waves kept pushing them. Originally, these waves were pushing them to their deaths, but now, they saved their lives and kept pushing them away from the center of the disaster. After they were completely away from the area where the underwater volcano erupted, Xiaoqing looked back and saw the gushing magma and volcanic ash like a dragon coming out of the sea, spewing dozens of meters high. It made Xiaoqing feel as if an atomic bomb had been thrown into the sea, and then with a bang, it exploded and created a huge splash. The power of nature had always been so terrifying and awe-inspiring. Xiaoqing only took one more look, then gritted her teeth and moved forward with the waves. At this moment, there were 2 people on the board. One was unconscious, and the other was injured. She was also carrying and dragging Yan Qiue. It was easier said than done to find a place to stay in this vast sea. If they couldn't find a place to stay, they would sink to the bottom of the sea sooner or later. After all, they couldn't float to Japan with such a small board. However, they didn't expect to encounter such a thing on their first trip to the sea. It was really a bad start. Xiao Qing didn't have time to sigh. She held her breath and pushed forward. Fortunately, the aquatic creatures in this area had all escaped. Those who couldn't escape had become a pot of boiled fish with the eruption of the underwater volcano. They didn't have to worry about this for the time being. After floating for a whole day, Feng Lan woke up when night fell again. He looked at the vast sea with some despair. After a long, long time, he buried his face in his arms. He was crying, but he didn't want his mood to affect Xiao Qing and the others. He didn't dare to cry out loud, so he quietly shed tears alone. He didn't want to die. He was only 19 years old, and he still had a young sister and younger brothers and sisters at home. They all needed someone to feed them. He could only be glad that before they went to the sea, Xiao Qing left them a lot of food so that they didn't have to worry about starvation in a short time. However, he was still worried. After he died, what would happen to his sister and younger brothers and sisters if they were bullied? No one would support them, no one would stand up for them. They could only cry silently like him. After he died, who would feed his sister and younger brothers and sisters? No one would be willing to feed a few strangers for no reason. His sister could only go out to find food, take risks, and risk her life. Just thinking about it made his heart ache. He didn't cherish his own life, but his sister and younger siblings. Xiao Qing was very calm. She took out the leftover food from her space. She couldn't heat it up, so she directly gave it to Feng Lan and Yan Qiue. Eat something to replenish your strength. I said I would bring you out alive. Feng Lan wiped his eyes. The corners of his eyes were a little red. It was obvious that he had just cried, but he didn't want Xiao Qing to see it. He looked a little awkward. Xiao Qing patted his head and said, "I'm a man of my word. If I say I'll take you out, I'll definitely take you out." Feng Lan answered awkwardly. She didn't have much of an appetite, but she still ate all the food that Xiao Qing handed her. Xiao Qing was worried that Yan Qiue's wound would open after soaking in the seawater for too long. She carried him on her back so that his upper body could float above the water. This time, Yan Qiue didn't force himself. He quietly finished eating and then put his arms around Xiao Qing's neck. Xiao Qing turned around and kissed him. She said softly, "If you're tired, sleep a little longer. Maybe when you wake up, we'll find a place to stay." Yan Qiue answered softly and then closed his eyes tiredly. The air dye's condition was not bad. Although it hadn't recovered, it didn't worsen either. There was just a lot of water in her chest. Xiao Qing turned the air dye over and poured the water out from the wound on her back. Chapter 430. Feng Lan was dumbfounded. His eyeballs almost fell to the ground. He pointed at air dye and said, You, my air dye isn't human. You better not point your finger at him. He might bite you." Xiao Qing deliberately scared Feng Lan. Feng Lan was so scared that he quickly hid his finger behind his back. Xiao Qing laughed at that moment. She lay on the wooden plank and laughed in a muffled voice. After a while, she said, "Little brother, don't be afraid. Dummy doesn't bite people. Even if you put your finger in his mouth, he won't bite." Feng Lan didn't dare to do that. He curled up into a ball and whimpered in the corner. He looked very pitiful. After a long time, he said softly, "I'll keep it a secret. Don't kill me." Xiao Qing was amused again. She leaned over and kissed air dye's pink lips. Then she said to Feng Lan, "Look, he really doesn't bite." Feng Lan was speechless. The night was especially unbearable. The cold sea water occasionally washed over the wooden board. They were all wet. Whether it was the people on the board or in the sea, there wasn't a dry spot on their bodies. Now wasn't the worst part. When the sun came out tomorrow and dried their clothes, a layer of salt particles would form on their clothes and rub against their skin. That would be the worst part. It was better to have wet clothes. When it was almost midnight, Feng Lan was still awake. Yan Qiue, on the other hand, was sleeping soundly. Xiao Qin leaned on the wooden board and looked at the moon. The moon was especially big when seen from the sea. The moonlight was so bright that it was much clearer than on land. Feng Lan couldn't sleep at all. His mind was full of anxiety. He was still a child and hadn't seen much. It was normal for him to be afraid. Xiao Qin couldn't help but say to him, "If you can't sleep, I'll tell you a story." Feng Lan seemed to have grasped at a life-saving straw. He said, "Okay." Xiao Qin told him, once upon a time, there was a king. His wife gave birth to a daughter. Her skin was as white as snow and her lips were like roses. Wait. Feng Lan couldn't help but interrupt Xiao Qin. She then said, "Did her stepmother harm her?" In the end, she ran into the forest and was saved by the 7 dwarfs. Isn't that Snow White? Even children have heard of her. Wrong. Xiao Qin sneered and said, "She ran into the forest and met 7 dwarfs. These dwarfs were all in their 30s or 40s. Because they were short and ugly, they couldn't find a wife. When they saw that Snow White was pretty, they raped her. After that, they lived a happy life. But one day, a prince found Snow White. He wasn't afraid of 1 or 2 dwarfs, but he couldn't beat 7 dwarfs. Then, he turned from 8 to 9. Feng Lan, it's different from what I know. Do you want to hear any other stories? Now that we are in the sea, why don't I tell you a story about a daughter of the sea?" Xiao Qin held her chin, looking pure and innocent. Feng Lan said warily, "It won't be a story of several episodes this time, right?" Xiao Qin shook her head. He then breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Go ahead." Although he had heard this story many times, in this dark night and floating on the sea, he still wanted to listen to others talk. It was safer. Once upon a time, there was a little mermaid. Do you know mermaids? Their nickname is the sea monster. The first time this little mermaid came to the sea, she tempted a ship to crash into a reef. The whole ship drowned, but there was a prince on the ship. He was very handsome, so the little mermaid saved him and pulled him into the sea to have sex. She didn't expect the prince to be so scheming. He was afraid that he wouldn't recognize her, so he poisoned the little mermaid and threatened her. The little mermaid didn't know, she only thought that the prince was very handsome and had sex with him. So she prepared to let him live and threw him back to the shore. Xiao Qin smiled evilly and said, after the little mermaid went back, she found out that she was poisoned. She was very angry and wanted to take revenge. So she found a witch and changed the potion. She had 2 legs and went ashore to find the prince to take revenge. In the end, the prince didn't recognize her and had sex with her again. The little mermaid was very happy and decided to wait a few days for revenge. In the end, the prince was going to get married and didn't want to have sex with her anymore. So she killed the bride at the wedding and even threatened the prince to give her the antidote. Chapter 431. Feng Lan, QAQ, I don't want to hear it. This story is poisonous. How about it? I have stories about Thumbelina, the Frog Prince, and so on. Shall I tell you? Xiao Qin rested her chin on her hand and smiled. Feng Lan hurriedly said, I think I'm sleepy and want to sleep. Let's talk about it another day. Then he quickly lay down and pretended to be asleep. As soon as he pretended to be asleep, he really fell asleep in a short while. Those fears were all thrown to the back of his mind. Xiao Qin stretched and tied herself to the wooden board. She slowly drifted forward with the waves and closed her eyes for a while. She was awake for most of the night. In the latter half of the night, Yan Qiue suddenly had a fever. Logically speaking, the body of an esper should be much better than that of an ordinary person. However, Feng Lan was completely fine while Yan Qiue's fever didn't subside. Xiao Qing was a little anxious, but there was nothing she could do. She could only untie him from her back and feed him some fresh water. He would definitely get worse if he soaked in the cold seawater. Xiao Qing sent out her vines and stretched them out to look around. After a long time, she found another wooden board. Xiao Qing dragged the wooden plank over and tied it together with the current wooden plank with vines. The vines tied it up layer after layer, like tape wrapped around it, and also like a layer of green carpet. In short, it was much softer, and the seawater didn't soak in for the time being. Xiao Qing then put Yan Qiue on it. If it weren't for the fact that the quilt became more damp after absorbing seawater, which was very harmful to Yan Qiue's body, Xiao Qing would have thrown dozens of quilts on it. Pushing the simple wooden raft, Xiao Qing didn't rest at night. She kept kicking the water with her feet and drifted forward bit by bit. She drifted for a day and a night without stopping. During this time, Feng Lan couldn't stand it anymore and asked her to rest, but she didn't move. Little brother Feng Lan was worried to death. No matter what, it was still manpower. How far could Xiao Qing push them? Could she push them until they found a place to settle down? She didn't want Xiao Qing, the backbone, to fall before she could find a place to settle down. However, Xiao Qing could only use this to vent the anxiety in her heart. Yan Qiue's high fever had not subsided. When she touched her forehead, it was boiling hot. She had to quickly find a safe place to rest. On the third day after the underwater volcano erupted, while they were still floating on the sea, Feng Lan saw something that looked like a shark fin appear on the surface of the sea not far away. He was shocked at that time. After all, the four of them were on the surface of the sea and didn't have anything to protect them. Once they were targeted, they would be 4 pieces of meat. Feng Lan was very nervous, but Xiao Qing was very happy. She let go of the vines and swam over there while saying, "I think we have a cart now. Wait for me to come back." Then, he ran over. Feng Lan was so frightened that she clung to the edge of the wooden board and shouted, "Sister Qing, come back quickly. That's a shark. It's too dangerous QAQ." Xiao Qing swam over. She had never seen a live shark before. At most, she had seen shark fins. It was a small group of sharks. There were only 3 sharks. 2 of them were a little bigger, and 1 was a little smaller. They looked like a father shark and a mother shark. They came out to look for food with their baby sharks. Xiao Qing didn't care whether they were a happy family or not. She directly rushed over and beat them up without any explanation. At first, the group of sharks was very fierce. They felt that they had been provoked by a small insect, so they rushed over to bite Xiao Qing. They looked like they wanted to swallow Xiao Qing. 2 minutes later, the 3 sharks whined and ran away. How could they bully fish like this? Chapter 432. Didn't they say that human beings were tiny insects that tasted good? Why was this human being different? Just like that, the 3 sharks were tied up by Xiao Qing's vines and driven back, giving Feng Lan a fright. Xiao Qing tied one end of the vines to the shark and the other end to the wooden board. Then, she drove the 3 sharks forward. The sharks were beaten very pitifully and completely gave in. They didn't dare to make trouble and ran forward with the wooden board. Xiao Qing said that if they behaved well, she would let them go after they found a place to rest. Otherwise, they would eat shark's fin for dinner. In order to be released after serving their sentences, the 3 sharks ran very fast in the water. From afar, it looked like Xiao Qing was chasing the 3 sharks on the wooden board. It was really different to have a native leading the way. That afternoon, before the sun set, they saw a small island. It was really a small island. From afar, it looked like a small black dot. No matter how big or small it was, at least they had a place to rest. As soon as Xiao Qing stepped on the beach, she felt an indescribable comfort. She hurriedly moved the injured people down and found a dry place to put them. Then, she dragged the wooden board to the shore and put it there. Finally, she let the 3 sharks go. The 3 sharks almost cried with joy. They were finally out of the hands of the big devil. Finally, they didn't have to become a plate of shark's fin. Congratulations. Mama, we won't pretend anymore. Because of the climate, this kind of small island was close to a tropical jungle in all aspects. Xiao Qing was worried that there would be poisonous snakes or something like that. The first thing she did was to set up a tent by the shore and sprinkle realgar around it. This realgar was bought in the capital when they needed to drink realgar wine during the festival. She didn't expect that it would be useful now. After moving Yan Qiue into the tent, Xiao Qing asked Dai and Feng Lan to set up another tent. She went into the tent to take care of Yan Qiue. Yan Qiue's fever still hadn't subsided. Xiao Qing took out new clothes from her space and prepared to change Yan Qiue's wet clothes. She unbuttoned all of Yan Qiue's buttons. When she lifted his body to take off his clothes, she suddenly felt something sticky on her hands. She flipped Yan Qiue over and saw that the place where Yan Qiue had been injured had already scabbed over. Now, it had been soaked in seawater and the flesh around the wound had turned white. But when he was in the sea, he didn't even make a sound. Xiao Qing held her breath. She felt a throbbing pain in her heart. She quickly took out the medicinal powder and found a clean towel and fresh water. After wiping Yan Qiue from head to toe, she applied the medicine on him. The pitiful Yan Qiue was only wearing a pair of pants as she lay there. Xiao Qing had bandaged her wound like a rabbit's ear. After cleaning up, Xiao Qing went out. Dai and Feng Lan hadn't set up the tent yet. She told them to be careful and protect Yan Qiue. Then she went to the forest to pick up some firewood to cook a hot meal. They had been floating in the sea for so long and hadn't had a hot meal. If they could drink some hot soup and have a good sleep, it would definitely relieve their physical and mental exhaustion. Especially Yan Qiue, he had a high fever and needed to replenish his strength. Once Xiao Qing went out, she didn't just pick up some firewood. She also found a lot of wild vegetables and wild mushrooms. She also caught a pheasant and prepared to make soup. Chicken soup was the most nutritious. With a bowl of hot soup and some medicine, Yan Qiue's body temperature might go down. Chapter 433. After picking up the firewood and packing up the food, Xiao Qing started a fire to make soup. She added wild mushrooms and chopped up the remaining wild vegetables to make pancakes. When Feng Lan was eating, tears came out of her eyes. She didn't expect to have a hot meal when she was stranded at sea. Xiao Qing scooped rice for both of them and a bowl of soup to feed Yan Qiue. He had been unconscious because of his high fever. After lying down for a while, he finally woke up a little. Xiao Qing fed him hot soup, but Yan Qiue's stomach was not good. At this time, he had a relapse and vomited half of the soup. Xiao Qing was tormenting Yan Qiue to death. After much difficulty, Xiao Qing finally managed to appease Yan Qiue to drink the soup and take some anti-inflammatory medicine. The anti-inflammatory medicine had a sleeping component, so Yan Qiue fell asleep again. At night, Xiao Qing didn't know if the surroundings were safe or dangerous. She didn't dare to sleep. She kept watch all night and let the other 3 rest. Feng Lan wanted to keep watch for Xiao Qing for the rest of the night, but she was kicked into the tent by Xiao Qing. In addition to keeping watch, she was also responsible for changing Yan Qiue's medicine. She couldn't rest for the whole night. Fortunately, she wasn't a human, so she could withstand such high-intensity work. Naturally, they couldn't stay on this island forever. They had to leave sooner or later. Xiao Qing thought about it and decided to leave and Yan Qiue got better. Of course, they couldn't leave directly. They could cut some wood and build a small boat. Then, they could find a few friendly sea friends to help her pull the carriage. No, pull the boat. They should arrive at Japan very soon. Of course, the most important thing now was to build the boat. After Yan Chiue took several doses of medicine, his fever dropped a lot. At least, he was no longer in a coma. Xiao Qing still placed him in the tent, and then went out every day to pick wood suitable for making a boat. This was very important. Otherwise, what if the boat broke down halfway? Yan Chiue sat in the tent and didn't slack off. Instead, he helped Xiao Qing draw the design plans. He didn't know how to build ships, nor was he a designer, but he was the best of the best. He was the only one in the group who could draw a design plan. During the day, Xiao Qing arranged the other two people to protect Yan Chiue, and then she would go out alone to look for wood and medicinal herbs. Let's see if there is anything else. If they could use it, then they would take it all back. The island didn't look big, but it was actually not small. At least, Xiao Qing hadn't reached the other side of the island even after searching for a whole day. She found a lot of interesting things, such as the man-eating flower, which she also had. There were many man-eating flowers growing on the island. There were also many other strange plants. For example, when she went out today, she saw plants that could disguise themselves as animals. When they stood there, they really looked like wild beasts. When she got closer, she found that they were actually just plants. There were really a lot of magical things on the island, but Xiao Qing didn't have time to explore them. She cut down several waterproof trees and then pulled them back. She was going to cut them into planks, and then put them together to make a boat. They had to use the best wood. Anyway, they could choose from all the trees on the island. Why should they make it difficult for themselves to use the worst ones? Xiao Qing almost finished the exploration alone. She went out to explore in the day, and was responsible for keeping watch at night. Feng Lan felt guilty many times. It was a little too cruel to ask a girl to protect and bear everything. Then, in the middle of the night, when he wanted to keep watch, he was stuffed into the tent again. After cutting down some trees, they began to cut the planks into the shape they wanted. It wasn't easy to make a boat. There were many steps to be done. If one step was missing, it might sink as soon as it touched the water. In this aspect, Feng Lan was more experienced. Although he hadn't built a boat himself, he often watched others build boats. After Yan Chiue drew the blueprint, the two often got together to discuss for a long time. How to make it reasonable, how to improve, how to change it, how to draw it. Xiao Qing found the place where she wrote the mark. She had explored here yesterday, so they could set off from here today and walk further in. As they walked further in, the trees grew more vigorous. Xiao Qing walked for a while and studied whether they were suitable for building boats. If they were suitable, she would cut them down directly and take the middle part back. If they weren't suitable, she would just ignore them. It took her 3 days to walk to the center of the island. After passing through a patch of vines, she discovered that there was a large tree in the middle of the island. This should be the center of the entire island. There was a very tall tree growing there. The leaves of the tree were very beautiful, as if there were countless fireflies surrounding the tree. Actually, if one looked carefully, they would find that there were no fireflies at all. It was the leaves of the tree that emitted the light. The leaves looked like small light bulbs. Even during the day, they persistently emitted light. Xiao Qing knew that the more glamorous things were, the more dangerous they were. So she stood on the side and used her hand to lift up a big tree. Before she could go forward to test if the tree was suitable for building a boat, a rabbit hopped in front of her. As soon as the rabbit got close to the tree, countless vines extended from the tree and directly wrapped the rabbit into a ball. Then, the rabbit became fertilizer under the tree. Xiao Qing walked over. The vines drilled out from the ground again, showing off to Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing walked over with her little vine. As expected, the vines took the initiative to attack her. However, it was useless because she also had vines. Moreover, her little vine was very reliable. None of the vines could get close to her. After Xiao Qing got closer, she plucked a lot of leaves. She planned to bring them back and let Yan Qiue see if they were precious plants or if they could be eaten. The most important thing was that they could be eaten. After returning, she gave the leaves to Yan Qiue. Then, Yan Qiue told Xiao Qing that this was a very special tree. He told Xiao Qing that this tree might become her fifth plant. After all, after she leveled up, she had not subdued a new plant. As for this tree, it had many functions. Its leaves could be eaten. They contained a lot of starch. They were the kind that could satisfy hunger. Moreover, it contained a special ingredient that could clear away heat and detoxify. Of course, it was to detoxify the less powerful poisons. The sap of the tree contained a kind of liquid that could dispel a person's negative status after drinking it. It also had an exciting effect. The leaves also emitted a fragrance that could cause hallucinations. Chapter 434. In order to know more about the tree, Yan Qiue went to the center of the island with Xiao Qing despite his weak body. He did a lot of experiments around the tree. In the end, he found that it was more useful than he had imagined. It had an ability that was especially useful. It used its smell to form a barrier. Whether it was miasma or poisonous gas, as long as it was not good gas, it would be repelled outside. In other words, as long as one was within the range of the tree, there was no need to worry about being poisoned. Especially if the other party had mutated plants like Chiu Tang, they would be completely restrained. Even if he was poisoned with general paralysis or coma, it would be fine. He would be fine after drinking some tree sap. Drinking a little when he was not poisoned was equivalent to the effect of a stimulant, which could improve one's fighting ability. Coupled with the hallucinogenic fragrance, it was simply an all-purpose plant. The vines that appeared around it were all dependent on it. They would be commanded by it and protect it. Then it would provide nutrients to these vines. It was mutually beneficial. What was Xiao Qing's strongest means? Wasn't it just vines? She could raise the main body of her vines on this tree. Xiao Qing's fighting ability was off the charts now. What she lacked was balance. As long as she subdued this mutated plant, her strength and teamwork ability would be improved to another level. Then Xiao Qing did not hesitate and directly subdued it. After subduing it, Xiao Qing parasitized the vines on this tree to absorb nutrients. Of course, she would not drain the pond to catch fish. After absorbing the nutrients, she would fertilize the tree or something and inject energy into it to let it recover. This nameless tree was finally named Guangguang by Xiao Qing because its leaves could glow. They stayed on the island for a long time. Most of the time was used to build boats. It was not as simple as building a boat with wood. There were many rules. For example, all the wood had to be soaked in tung oil first, especially the bottom of the boat, which was a thicker version. That way, the boat would not leak after it went into the water. The only thing they could build was the kind of boat that was paddled by people. When the time came, they would find a few people to pull the boat for them. For example, the few sharks this time were very good representatives. If they were tired on the way, they could catch a few others to replace them. It was simply amazing. It was much more difficult than they had imagined. Moreover, the first boat they had built had a leak in the cabin when they were launching it, and it sank to the bottom. Later on, after learning from his experience, he started to build a second one, so he wasted a lot of time. As for building ships, they also knew how to hunt to enrich their lives. All in all, they lived a good life. Every day, they could have different kinds of picnics. With Xiao Qing, who was a master chef, their life was very happy. Then, as they played and worked, they finally built the second ship and prepared to test the waters. A few people pushed the boat to the seaside and then slowly pushed the boat into the sea. After pushing it into the sea, they checked everything and finally found that the boat was a success this time. At least a day and a night had passed, and not a single drop of water had leaked in. This at least meant that if the ship was sailing on the sea, there would be no problem for a short period of time. As for how long it would take, they just wanted to go to Japan. This place should not be too far away from Japan. If they caught a few coolies to pull the boat, they would be able to reach Japan in less than 10 days to half a month. After confirming that the boat was successfully built, they were not in a hurry to leave. Instead, they first fixed the boat and then returned to the shore. They had long finished all the vegetables and fruits they had brought with them since they went out to sea. Chapter 435. After all, they couldn't bring too many vegetables and fruits with them. Therefore, they ate dried meat and seafood almost every meal for the past 2 days. After all, dried meat could be stored for a long time, and the seafood was ready-made. Therefore, before they left, they planned to search the island for some wild vegetables and fruits to bring along. Anyway, it was already afternoon, and they would have to stop soon. They might as well pack up on the island, rest for the night, and set off tomorrow. Then, Feng Lan was responsible for collecting firewood nearby. Er Dai and Yen Chiue were injured, so they couldn't walk too far. They were left nearby to look for wild vegetables. Xiao Qing went out to hunt. It was quite novel to eat seafood for 2 or 3 meals, but she couldn't stand eating it every day. She planned to catch a few more prey, pluck the fur, remove the internal organs, and marinate them with salt. They could be stored for a long time. After a long time, Feng Lan had made a fire and was sitting on the side to fill the firewood. Yen Chiue was picking vegetables, and Er Dai was sitting beside Yen Chiue. He followed suit, but it was a mess. Xiao Qing came back with a few small wild animals such as pheasants and rabbits. She dragged a wild boar the size of a small hill. The wild boar was very big, and its fur stood up like needles. Its fangs were curved and looked very sharp. It was so big, Feng Lan swallowed and said, "Are we going to eat this tonight?" "Well, don't look at how big this wild boar is. Its meat is very tender. You can roast it, boil it, or fry it." Xiao Qing put the huge wild boar on the ground and then began to dig into the space. In the end, she found a knife of good length and began to cook the wild boar. First, she had to cut open its stomach and take out all the offal. The offal, the pig's heart, and the pig's liver were all delicious. She could cook them directly and slice them, then eat them all at once. Then, she removed the pig's hair. Originally, this needed to be done with hot water before removing the pig's hair. However, they didn't bring a lot of fresh water, so they couldn't afford to waste it. Therefore, Xiao Qing directly gave up on removing the pig's skin and threw away the skin and hair. The remaining pork was cut into pieces. Some of it was pickled with salt, and some of it was prepared to be eaten tonight. Because they were leaving tomorrow, Xiao Qing made a very sumptuous meal tonight. A plate of red braised meat was soaked in the sauce. The aroma could probably spread hundreds of meters away. As for the fragrant meat, they found a very special plant. Its leaves had a special fragrance. After adding fennel, chili, and other spices, it tasted very good. There was also garlic pork ribs. Such a big pig could be used at will. Xiao Qing took the most tender ribs and placed them on the plate. After being cooked, it was enough to make people drool. There was also golden barbecued meat, wild vegetable meat soup, and a pot of porridge with wild vegetables. It was very sumptuous. This was the world of foodies. Anyway, Feng Lan had never seen such a thing. They were stranded on an isolated island, but they still ate as if they were in a 5-star hotel. How fucking extravagant. But I like it. They had just started to eat and hadn't eaten much when they suddenly heard a sentence in a bird's language. The translation was, "Oh my God, look! A ship! We're saved!" When Xiaoqing heard that, wasn't that Japanese? At that time, she was a little surprised that they had found a guide. After all, it was very difficult to find the right direction on the vast sea. Once they deviated from the route, they might not be in Japan anymore. As for whether the owner of the voice was willing to lead the way, it didn't matter. If they were still unwilling, there was nothing they could do. Then, Xiaoqing stood up and let Dai and the others continue to eat. She stood up and walked to the beach. As soon as she left, Yan Qiue followed. Dai also wanted to follow, but was stopped by Yan Qiue. When they reached the beach, there was a broken wooden board on the beach. 3 men and a woman surrounded the boat they had just built. They were extremely surprised. There were a little too many people. Their boat couldn't be brought along, and they didn't need so many people for a guide. Xiaoqing rubbed her chin. Only then did those people see Xiaoqing and the others. They looked at each other. One of the men with braids stood out and asked in Japanese, "Is this your ship?" Xiaoqing understood their language, and so did Yan Qiue. Xiaoqing glanced at Yan Qiue, and Yan Qiue immediately said, "That's right." "What's the matter?" The man raised his head, and his nostrils were about to poke the sky. "We're requisitioning this ship." As he spoke, he raised his hand, and a small tornado appeared on the beach. A level 3 mutant. Xiaoqing laughed after making the judgment. They wanted to snatch it just because they were mutants. Were these people retarded? Who would dare to go out to sea if they didn't have some ability? A level 3 mutant dared to show off. Before they could say anything, the only woman in the group pointed at the bonfire not far away and said excitedly, "Everyone, look. It's food." The eyes of the 4 people turned green. They had been drifting on the sea for a long time, and they had relied on a few dry biscuits to survive until now. Now, when they saw Dai and the others, with a piece of pork ribs in their left hand and a pair of chopsticks in their right hand, they wanted to pounce on them immediately like a few green-eyed wolves. The person who spoke first immediately said, "We're requisitioning this food too." Then, he took out a few level 1 and level 2 mutant crystal nuclei and threw them to Xiaoqing with an expression that said, "This is your reward." Yan Qiue was amused. These level 1 and level 2 mutant crystal nuclei were like trash in Xiaoqing's hands. Normally, when they went out to do missions and encountered zombies, they would only take level 3 mutant crystal nuclei. It could be said that if a level 2 mutant crystal nucleus fell on the ground, they wouldn't even pick it up. These people were definitely retarded. Yan Qiue immediately laughed and said, "Everyone in the world is your mother. If you want to rob us, you should know your own strength first." Hearing that, the man was nervous at first, and then he carefully looked at Xiaoqing and the others. At first glance, Xiaoqing was undoubtedly an ordinary person. Dai and Xiaoqing didn't have any energy waves. Only Yan Qiue was a mutant. Among the 4 of them, 3 were mutants. Why would they be afraid of ordinary people like Xiaoqing and the others? Another man in a samurai suit said, "Sangjun, there's no need to talk to them. Just kill them all." The last man smiled wretchedly and said, "Remember to keep this girl alive. I haven't seen such a good girl in a long time." Chapter 436. Xiaoqing was a little angry, but it was just a little. She never cared too much about the dead, but Yan Qiue was very angry. Xiaoqing was his wife now, but someone insulted his wife in front of him. How could he bear it? No. The 2 people in front carefully looked at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was really beautiful, and they were very tempted. However, the woman beside them was a little anxious. When the ship they were on capsized, many people fell into the sea and drowned. This plank couldn't support too many people. After the three ninjas went up, they didn't plan to save the others. She had relied on her beauty to seduce these three people and was only able to survive. If they had taken a fancy to Xiaoqing, would they have left her on this deserted island? Although she didn't think that she was worse than Xiaoqing, no matter how beautiful a woman was, she would be tired of looking at and eating for a long time. She was not as fresh as Xiaoqing. Before she could figure out what to do, the man beside her, who had been the first to speak vulgarly to Xiaoqing, exploded into a bloody flower. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, dying the remaining three people. They were all stunned, and their mouths were wide open like dead fish. Yan Qiue's eyes were bloodshot. He raised his hand, and the remaining two men who dared to look at Xiaoqing were also imprisoned by him. Who knows the way to Japan? Yan Qiue asked softly. The woman was smart and quickly said, I know. Yan Qiue nodded with satisfaction, and squeezed the remaining two men into 2 meat patties. Only the blood flowed and soaked the ground. A trace of disgust flashed in Yan Qiue's eyes, and he took a handkerchief to wipe his fingertips. Xiaoqing looked at the last woman. Her clothes were wet. She only wore a white shirt and a short skirt. She was probably naked inside, because after her clothes were wet, her body was almost half hidden. Xiaoqing found a coat and threw it to her, and then said lightly, lead the way honestly. Don't have any thoughts that you shouldn't have. When we arrive at Japan, I will let you go. The woman nodded timidly and followed Xiaoqing back to the bonfire. Young brother Feng Lan, who had witnessed everything, was dumbfounded. He always knew that Xiaoqing was cruel, but he didn't expect Yan Qiue to be so cruel. However, he knew very well that those Japanese were definitely not good people. After all, he could feel that Xiaoqing and the others were not bloodthirsty people after getting along with them for a long time. If the other party didn't have a death wish, they wouldn't kill people casually. The name of the Japanese woman that Xiaoqing brought back was Muko Ito. At least on the surface, she seemed to be a relatively obedient woman. Xiaoqing didn't intend to torture his captive, so he gave her some food. Anyway, there was so much food that they couldn't finish it. Muko Ito took the food gratefully and squatted aside to eat. On the other side, Xiaoqing packed up the kitchen utensils and was ready to sleep. Muko Ito became a problem. She couldn't live with men, especially the men in Xiaoqing's family. Xiaoqing had no choice but to let Er die and the other two men sleep in one tent, while she and Muko Ito slept in the same tent. Yan Qiue was very unhappy about this, but no matter how unhappy he was, he could only listen to Xiaoqing. For the whole night, Muko Ito slept in the corner, looking pitiful. The next morning, Xiaoqing woke up early. She went to pick some fresh wild vegetables that were still wet with dew and cooked a pot of porridge. While cooking the porridge, she had already gone to the sea. She wanted to find a few large fish like sharks to pull the boat for them. She didn't expect that the 3 sharks from before were still nearby. Chapter 437. They just floated on the surface of the water and basked in the sun. When they saw Xiaoqing, they were no longer afraid. Instead, they came over and circled around Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing smiled. When she let the 3 sharks go, she felt that it was a waste to order them around. So, she fed them all the level 1 and level 2 crystal nuclei that she had stored in her space for a long time. Although the level of those crystal nuclei was not high, there were a lot of them. It probably helped them a lot and let them taste the sweetness. Xiaoqing touched the head of the little shark and said, "Send us to Japan. I will give you more when we get there." Then, she took the 3 sharks back. When she went back, the porridge was already ready. When everyone woke up, she distributed the porridge to them and said, "Let's go after eating the porridge." They ate the porridge, packed up their things, and boarded the boat. Ito Jimuko was shocked by the 3 sharks. When he looked at Xiao Qing and the others, his eyes were filled with awe. The boat wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. It could fit 5 or 6 people, and it was still quite spacious. There were 2 cabins on the boat. After all, with Feng Lan around, Xiao Qing had to avoid taking a bath or anything like that. Now, there was another Ito Jimuko. Yan Chiyue was irritated. He couldn't wait to throw Ito Jimuko into the water to feed the fish. Because ever since Ito Jimuko came, he couldn't get close to Xiao Qing even once. After pushing the boat into the water, the 3 sharks pulled the boat and swam in the direction pointed by Ito Jimuko. With these 3 sharks, ordinary sea creatures didn't dare to get close. They saved a lot of trouble. There was a door between the 2 cabins. 3 men lived on one side and 2 women lived on the other side. When it was time to eat, they would stop to fish, cook, and feed the sharks. Their days were quite leisurely. Moreover, these 3 sharks were quite intelligent. They went in the direction of Japan on their own. They didn't need Ito Jimuko to lead the way. Muko Ito had always been very nervous. She was afraid that she would be thrown away when she was useless. After all, a useless person was not one of them. She was a captive. She could eat and live for free. She might even be thrown into the water to feed the fish. However, Xiao Qing and the others didn't say anything for a while. In the afternoon, they stopped again. Xiao Qing and Erdai moved a small bench and sat at the bow of the boat to fish. There were 3 sharks next to them. They didn't know that they had already scared a lot of fish away. These 3 sharks were waiting to be fed here. From time to time, Xiao Qing would throw a few pieces of meat for them to eat. Fishing was fun, not to catch a lot. On the other side, Yan Chiyue was reading in the cabin and sulking. Xiao Qing hadn't slept with him for a long time, and usually, she wouldn't give him a kiss of love to comfort him. Just as he was reading, Ito Jimuko suddenly came in. Yan Chiyue thought that she had gone to the wrong place, so he looked at her and said in Japanese, "Your cabin is next door." Ito Jimuko didn't leave. Instead, she came to his side. She bent down and deliberately opened a button on her collar. She couldn't hold the fullness of her chest anymore, giving people the feeling that it was about to jump out. Yan Chiyue's face immediately darkened. "Get out." Yan Jun Ito Jimuko knelt beside Yan Chiyue and stretched out her hand with a pitiful expression. Then, she said, "Please let me serve you. I will make you happy." When Yan Chiyue almost kicked him out, Xiao Qing was already squatting at the door. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Ito Jimuko, then said, "This man is mine." Yan Chiyue was originally a little nervous, but then, he saw Xiao Qing looking down at Ito Jimuko with a cold and murderous gaze. She was clearly jealous. Yan Chiyue, who was originally a little nervous and panicked, immediately felt as if his heart was soaked in honey. Xiao Qing kicked Ito Jimuko away, then pressed Yan Chiyue against the wall and said to Ito Jimuko with a smile, "Fortunately, you didn't have the time to touch him, otherwise, would have chopped off your hand, and I would have peeled off any piece of skin on your body that touched him." Muko Ito was already scared. She sat on the ground, trembling. Xiao Qing grabbed Yan Chiyue's collar and kissed her fiercely, leaving a shallow bite mark on her lips. She spat and said, "You're just a plaything that attracts bees and butterflies." Yan Chiyue felt wronged. He hugged Xiao Qing and said in her ear, "Then, my queen, are you going to punish me?" Xiao Qing glanced at Ito Jimuko again and again. She wanted to prove Yan Chiyue's ownership, but she didn't want Ito Jimuko to see Yan Chiyue's cute appearance when he was aroused. With a wave of her hand, she threw Ito Jimuko out and closed the door. After closing the door, Xiao Qing threw Yan Chiyue aside, then found a chair and sat down. She raised her chin and said, "Take off your clothes." Yan Chiyue was a little ashamed, but he was more expectant. He slowly unbuttoned his clothes. His movements were not seductive at all, but there was a sense of passion. It made people want to push him to the ground and tear his clothes directly. When Yan Qiue took off all his clothes, Shao Qing pulled him into her arms, turned his back to her, and carefully observed the wound on his back. The wound had scabbed for the second time, but because it was soaked in seawater last time, and the wound was not shallow, it would probably leave a scar. Shao Qing kissed him, then laughed and scolded, "Bad guy, how can you attract bees and butterflies like this?" Yan Qiue felt even more wronged. "I didn't do anything." Shao Qing touched the scar on his back, then carefully nibbled on the skin on his back. When Yan Qiue moved, his porcelain-like skin was dyed red. Shao Qing decisively pushed him away and said, "I'll go out and take a look. I'll also settle this matter while I'm at it." Yan Qiue, who was already aroused and burned quite badly, was speechless. His wife had learned bad things. She couldn't be like this. He was already so aroused. In the end, Shao Qing left just like that. What a scam. Was she going to let him live? QAQ indeed, this was a punishment, sob sob sob, a jealous wife was so scary. On the other side, Shao Qing had already come out of the cabin. Ito Jimuko was kneeling on the ground and crying softly, her face full of despair. Shao Qing kicked her knee and said lightly, "Some thoughts are not for you to think about." Chapter 438. Mukiko was stunned. She thought that Shao Qing would kill her or throw her into the sea to feed the fish, but Shao Qing didn't. She didn't do anything. After the warning, she lazily went back to the fishing spot. When she hugged Dai, she smiled and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, this man is also mine." She wasn't killed, and it seemed that she was allowed to stay on the ship. Mukiko was so happy that she cried and was very grateful. She knew very well what would happen to a man who coveted a powerful female paranormal in the apocalypse. She was prepared to die, but she was lucky. Of course, she didn't know that if it wasn't for the fact that she didn't have time to do anything, Shao Qing would have thrown her into the sea long ago. It was only because Yan Qiue's expression pleased Shao Qing that she had the thought of giving her a chance. That was all. Then Feng Lan, Ito Jimiko, and Shao Qing lived a life of being dazzled by Shao Qing every day. One was a dummy, and the other was Yan Qiue. They were so tired of her that they wished they could stick to Shao Qing every day. Mukiko, who used to sleep in the same room with Shao Qing, was kicked out and could only sleep on the deck. Then Yan Qiue and Dummy immediately took the opportunity to sneak back into Shao Qing's bed. But there was one thing that was pitiful. Dummy couldn't eat, which was quite normal. Yan Qiue had the ability, but she could only watch and couldn't eat. After officially being together with Yan Qiue, Shao Qing cared more about Yan Qiue's body. She didn't want Yan Qiue to die early because of her body. She hoped that Yan Qiue could be well and they could live together for the rest of their lives. The first step of nourishing the body was abstinence. The second step was eating habits. The third step was moderate exercise. There was nothing to exercise on the ship. He couldn't get up every morning and run around the cabin. The last step was temporarily put aside. The first and second points needed to be thoroughly implemented. Especially abstinence. There was a saying that 1 drop of that 10 drops of blood was harmful to the body. Therefore, he had to abstain from sex. Shao Qing was glad that she had changed many of Yan Qiue's bad eating habits and work and rest habits. Now she just needed to stick to it. She was doing this for Yan Qiue's good, and Yan Qiue knew that as well. But in front of his wife, it was really a sad thing to be able to see but not eat. Compared to Dai, she was treated much better. After all, Dai could only do that when she was breaking through. Therefore, Shao Qing was not on guard. It was normal for her to kiss and hug him. Yan Qiue was like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. This extremely unfair treatment made Yan Qiue tear up. Every day, she wanted to bang her head on the ground and knock a hole in the deck. While showing off their love, she also trained Yan Qiue. After a few days, they finally saw the coast. There was an indescribable sense of accomplishment. After all, they had experienced too much. It was inevitable that they would be a little excited when they arrived in Japan. After arriving on the shore, Xiaoqing was very grateful to the three cute sharks. They had a good cooperation, so she especially wanted to hire them again on the return trip. But she couldn't let them wait. So after Xiaoqing gave them a lot of crystal nuclei, they were reluctant to part with each other. As soon as Muko Ito came ashore, she took the initiative to say to Xiaoqing, "Maybe the Chinese Empire is different from our Japan. Here, it's very chaotic. We advocate strength above all. People are even divided into different classes. Paranormals are superior, while ordinary people can only be slaves. Their lives are very miserable. There is even a human trade between survivor bases. If you want to stay in Japan for a while, I suggest that you first get a residence certificate of a base as a pass. It will be more convenient for you to move." Chapter 439. She was actually quite nervous. After all, she had done something wrong, and she was a useless ordinary person. She was very worried that Xiaoqing would just leave her on the coast. She could tell that Xiaoqing was actually a good person, especially to the people around her. Xiaoqing would give the best to the people around her within the scope of her ability for food, clothing, housing, and transportation. She really wanted to follow Xiaoqing, at least until Xiaoqing left Japan. She was just worried that Xiaoqing would not be willing to take her. In fact, Idiot Love was quite willing to take her, especially since Ito Kumiko was very obedient now. Instead of throwing Ito Kumiko away and catching another person back to train, it was better to use Ito Kumiko. Xiaoqing directly said, "I want to go to Mount Fuji. You lead the way. If you do well, I will give you a fortune before leaving. I can let you live for a few years without worrying about food and clothing." Muko Ito was very happy and thanked him again and again. Xiaoqing continued, "You are a native, and you must know more than us in all aspects. Since it is more convenient to get a pass, you can find a nearby base. Then let's go." Muko Ito nodded and quickly said, "There's a base in front of us, but I haven't been to this base before." Seeing that she was a little embarrassed, Xiaoqing touched his chin and said, "Then let's go and have a look first. It just so happens that we need to replenish some vegetables and fruits." The five of them went to the base that Muko Ito mentioned. After taking a few steps, they saw a group of paranormals escorting a group of people to the base. It didn't matter if they didn't see it, but when they saw it, they were shocked. This group of people had big pustules on their faces and bodies, and some parts were rotten. They could even see maggots wriggling. There were adults and children, men and women, and they were all driven to the beach. Xiaoqing frowned and pulled her friends to the side to hide. Then, she saw that after the paranormals drove these people to the beach, they took out their knives, killed them all, and threw their bodies into the sea. Immediately, large fish swam over and fought to devour the corpse. Muko Ito hurriedly said, "After the doomsday, there were several earthquakes. As a result, there was a nuclear energy leak. Paranormals were fine, but many ordinary people were exposed to radiation. Especially those who were closer to the source of the leak, they had a very strange disease. Pustules grew on their bodies, and they began to rot. They could even infect others. So once they contracted this disease, they would be caught and disposed of to prevent them from infecting others." Xiaoqing frowned. She was very worried about Foam Lawn. After all, he was an ordinary person. What if he was accidentally exposed to radiation? This thing was illusory. Who knew if he would be exposed to radiation? Muko Ito continued, this incident happened a long time ago, so the radiation is slowly weakening. Once this disease occurs, it can be treated. It requires high-level zombie nuclei and high-level wood paranormals, so ordinary people can't find anyone who is willing to help them. Only death awaits them. Xiao Qing was a little relieved. She suddenly felt that the Celestial Empire was still great. At least, there was no such radiation in the Celestial Empire, and on the surface, it seemed to be relatively fair. Muko Ito led the group and introduced Japan to them as they walked. Soon, they arrived near the base she mentioned. Xiao Qin was shocked. She felt that her knowledge was too shallow. She had never heard of a country where human trafficking was legal, cannibalism was allowed, human experimentation was justified, and slavery was popular. Chapter 440. Killing people on the street was just a small case, and it couldn't be more common. Especially those ordinary people, once they angered the paranormals, being killed was actually the happiest outcome. This country was too scary, compared to the Celestial Empire, it was like heaven. It was said that Xiao Qin couldn't accept it. Although Japan was very scary, the process of entering the base was similar. Ordinary people needed to be quarantined for a night before they could enter the base, while paranormals only needed to register and prove that they were paranormals. Xiao Qin didn't want to keep a low profile, but she also didn't want to be too high profile, so when she filled in the registration form, she filled in as a 4th level wood paranormal. Yen Chiue also filled in as a 4th level air die, strength paranormal. Before entering the base, Mukiko Ito had begged Xiao Qin to speak up for her. This was because it was normal for ordinary people, especially beautiful women like her, to be toyed with during quarantine. In fact, it was even, very normal. Although she had no choice in the past and had to sell her body in exchange for a chance to live, which woman would be willing to be played like this? Moreover, little brother Feng Lan was so handsome, and he was also very dangerous. Therefore, before Xiao Qin went in, she gave some crystallic cores to the guards at the door. Coupled with her formidable strength, those people wouldn't do anything to Feng Lan, Ito Jumiko, and Mukiko. Mukiko Ito told Xiao Qin a lot about the rules of the base, so the first thing Xiao Qin and her friends did after entering the base was to find a place to stay and wait for Feng Lan and Mukiko Ito to come back. As soon as they entered the base, they deeply felt what Mukiko Ito had said. Ordinary people were worse than dogs. Because as soon as they entered, they saw several uniformed men dragging away a badly mutilated body, and next to them was a paranormal with an arrogant face, who was wiping the blood on his hands with a handkerchief. Those shabbily dressed ordinary people with yellow faces were very timid, and they didn't even dare to come close, let alone watch the show like in the Celestial Empire. He was afraid that if he accidentally angered this lord, he would also become a bloody corpse. Not far away, there was a big fat man holding a young girl's hand. That's right, he was holding a dog's leash in his hand. The other end of the leash was connected to a dog collar, which was around the young girl's neck. The pitiful girl was only wearing a thin cotton shirt and shorts. If she crawled a little slower, she would be whipped. Her back was covered in streaks of blood. Was this the cruelest thing? No. There was also another man who was dragging a naked woman on the road with a rope around her neck. No one knew how long they had been dragging her. The woman clutched the rope around her neck and was on the verge of death. Her body was also badly mutilated. It was hard to tell whether it was her chest or her back. All that could be seen were her flesh and bones. There were a lot of things like this. They just entered the gate of the base and saw a lot of them. Not to mention those people who were sitting at the entrance of the tent with numb faces and clothes that couldn't cover their bodies. None of them were uninjured. This was simply a hell for ordinary people. Xiao Qin couldn't help but frown. Before coming to Japan, she didn't have a good impression of this country, but she didn't plan to do anything. She just wanted to go to Mount Fuji to see if there was anything that Air Dai needed, and then leave this place. But now, she had an impulse to directly blow up this small Japan. How could there be such an existence in this world? Both countries had experienced the end of the world, and there were two extremes between paranormals and ordinary people, but the Celestial Empire was much better than here. Although there were a lot of unfairness in the Celestial Empire, at least on the surface, it was still relatively fair. Moreover, ordinary people could eat, wear warm clothes, and have a place to live. They didn't have to worry about their own safety at all times. Although paranormals were also high and mighty, they wouldn't abuse people for fun like here. Moreover, in the Celestial Empire, there were rules and simple laws that restricted everyone. Xiao Qing took a deep breath. She suddenly wanted to kill someone. Chapter 441. Suppressing her anger, Xiao Qing pulled her friend and quickly walked in, preparing to find a place to stay. At this time, a dagger suddenly fell from the sky and stabbed into the ground beside Xiao Qing's feet. The thing that was holding a woman's hand was playing with another dagger while looking at Xiao Qing and the others from head to toe. One woman and two men, all of whom had outstanding appearances. Moreover, Air Dai and Xiao Qing were zombies, so it was impossible to see their strength with the naked eye. They looked like two ordinary people. Therefore, in the eyes of this thing that couldn't even be considered a human, Yan Qiue and his two slaves were the only paranormals. At first glance, Yan Qiue was a newcomer, and his aura wasn't strong, so this thing was tempted. It just so happened that he had played with all his slaves to death, leaving only the one beside his feet, and he was tired of playing with her. If he could take Xiao Qing and the other two as his slaves, he could play with these three beauties with outstanding appearances and good temperaments. Newcomers. This thing smiled obscenely and said to Yan Qiue, "Do you want to make a bet? Let's have a bet. If you win, you can do whatever you want with my slaves. If I win, you and your two slaves will belong to me." While speaking, he licked the corner of his mouth, as if he couldn't wait to do something to Xiao Qing and the others. Before the apocalypse, he was just an ordinary office worker. Because he didn't have any abilities, he was bullied by his boss in the company, and at home, he was bullied by his wife. After the apocalypse, he found out that he had become a paranormal, and the first thing he did was to kill his wife. He had had enough of this old woman. Then, he killed his boss's wife in front of his boss, and finally fed his boss to zombies. Such a heartless and vicious thing had actually survived from the beginning of the apocalypse until now. Xiao Qing felt that this was a miracle. She felt that all the anger she had accumulated since she stepped onto the shore had finally found a source. Xiao Qing raised her hand without saying a word, and a vine whip immediately appeared in her hand. It was about 2 fingers thick, and the vine whip was covered with dense spikes. There were even barbs on it, and it looked very sharp. That thing panicked for a moment. He clearly felt that Xiao Qing was an ordinary person. However, she was able to conjure a vine whip out of thin air, which proved that Xiao Qing was a psychic, and a psychic that he couldn't see through. At the very least, she was much stronger than him, which was why he could not feel the energy flow in Xiao Qing's body. However, his panic only lasted for a few seconds, because the moment Xiao Qing attacked, Yan Qiue had already confined the air around him, making him unable to move. He could only watch the vine whip falling on his face. The spikes pierced into his flesh, and the barbs tore his flesh apart when the whip swung up. Within a few minutes, Xiao Qing had turned the man into a bloody man. There were wounds all over his body. His blood fell to the ground and gathered into a pool at his feet. It was a horrifying sight. However, these were all flesh wounds, because Xiao Qing hadn't vented her anger yet. How could she directly injure his muscles and bones and kill him? After whipping and beating for more than 10 minutes, that thing didn't even look human anymore. Xiao Qing waved her hand and summoned a bunch of vines. Like a meat grinder, she directly ground that thing into minced meat and bones. After that, she shook the vines and said with disgust, "You dirted my vines." Yan Qiue grabbed her hand and gently kissed the back of her hand. "I was jealous when I saw you whipping others. In the future, let me deal with this kind of thing." You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.